Chapter 221. Eternal Pursuit Pavilion. Who the fuck have I messed with? Knox cussed as she used Shadow Clone to switch her position again to avoid being blown to pieces. The world around her blurred, and she briefly stumbled on a tree root after instantaneously switching positions with her clone about a mile away. Shadow Clone was a chi-intensive technique that allowed her to swap places instantly with a humanoid shadow that she could control remotely. Without the dense foliage providing miles of shadows, she would never have been able to switch places with a clone so far away during the middle of the day. But for once, the terrain was working to her advantage. Knox thanked the 9 realms she'd had the foresight to activate the Shadow Clone technique in time when she saw that floating behemoth that looked more like an island outfitted for battle in the sky approaching on the distant horizon. But she had not been prepared for what happened next. The volley of spatial bombs from the ship that was now obscured behind an illusion array impacted the area she had been in a second before, and she felt the connection with her Shadow Clone cease as the ground trembled and a shockwave smashed through the forest, sending a surge of loose sticks and debris her way. Knox raised her shadow-coated arm to mitigate the shockwave. Only 3 clones left. She clicked her tongue in annoyance at the wasted chi as she faintly pulled on the connection with her last 3 shadow clones running eastward. This is going to be a problem. I should have made even more clones, but they are so chi-intensive. With no interest in fighting, as she had only just recovered her cultivation, Knox planned to use any means necessary to flee. Hence, she had used the costly technique, but now she wished she had gone even further and made as many clones as possible. If the clear blue sky transitioning into a spatial storm that tore reality apart and the volleys of spatial bombs that blew up the foliage she was seeking refuge under wasn't enough, the distance she had put between herself and the ship had been rapidly closed by the red clones flying behind her on swords. It should be impossible for them to catch up to her since she was using Shadow Walk to swim through the shadows and Shadow Step to outright teleport. But the red clones utilized portals within the spatial storm to instantly close the gap whenever she switched positions. It was deeply frustrating, forcing her to burn even more chi to maintain any distance. And that wasn't all. Knox could feel the monsters throughout the forest that she had empowered with her shadows being silently killed, likely by that void monster, which was somehow still alive after being nearly obliterated back on the Red Close Mountain. Yet despite all of this, Knox would have been convinced of her ability to escape, especially after using her costly Shadow Clone technique, if not for this strange light beam originating from the floating ship that would lock onto her within seconds of using the Shadow Clone skill to reposition. The beam of light was so intense it carved through the foliage, set trees on fire, and was constantly on her tail. Knox had ensured that the trees around her weren't exposing her position like last time. So she couldn't for the life of her think up a reason they were able to track her so effortlessly. Even more questionable was where this powerful light cultivator came from. If the source of this light beam, whether it was an artifact or a cultivator, had been present during the meeting, she would have most certainly perished a few weeks ago. A few moments ago, Knox debated how much shadow chi she would use to escape. But now, she was starting to worry if escape was even possible. The wilderness was vast, and the forest went on for many miles, but there were patches of meadow up ahead where shadows would be hard to come by, and she would be exposed to the midday sun. If it comes down to a fight, the red clothes should be no match for me, Knox thought as she glanced over her shoulder at the rapidly gaining star core cultivators with red hair. I just need to keep tabs on the void monster. If that's even possible. Few things struck fear into her heart more than the void element, and she was not alone. The fact it was such a hard to cultivate affinity mattered little when a single shot to the head was enough to end her existence. Sure, it might take that cultivator or monster months, if not years, to recover the void chi from that single attack, but she wouldn't be alive to enact revenge, so why should she care? Unless I place a bounty on its head, Knox thought as she heard the trees behind her crashing to the ground in a blaze due to the light beam still following her, carving a path only 100 or so meters behind her. It wasn't dead accurate, but it was close enough that the red clothes could hit her with wide area attacks, which Knox knew they were about to do by the immense gathering of fire chi in the sky. Knox used Shadow Step to teleport to the side as a ball of crimson flame 100 meters wide brightened the sky like a shooting star and then crashed into the area before her. Superheated air was the first to meet her shrouded face, followed by a literal wall of fire that slammed into her, and if not for her shadow armor, she would have suffered from extreme burns. Was the Grand Elder always this strong? Knox was baffled by the stark difference in strength from just a few weeks ago. There was also the chance that the Grand Elder was shoving as much chi as possible into that single attack and could only do a few before retreating. My star core is filled to the brim with chi, and I should be the highest stage cultivator here. Knox thought as she traveled through the shadows at immense speed. If I keep baiting them into using such large-scale attacks and wear them out, I might be able to turn the tables and go on the offensive. That way, I free myself of these pursuers as the Tainted Cloud sect is still far from here. Annoyingly, due to the Grand Elder's attack, Knox was practically forced to head north or south as a large section of the eastern forest was now ablaze, cutting off her direct route to the only place she considered home. Deciding to head north to put as much distance between her and the slow-moving ship in the distance, her eyes widened as a second ball of flame descended before her, originating from the other weaker Star Core Elder. Since when did the Red Claw family have 2 fucking Star Core Elders? I was told by the Void Mind family that they were weak. Knox seethed as she mobilized her shadow chi to form a giant claw of shadows that raised up to catch the far weaker fireball. It would be troublesome if it set even more of the forest on fire and potentially cut off her connection to her clones. Considering this Red Claw Elder was only at the first stage and, therefore, 8 stages below, Nox's Shadow Claw easily raised up and snuffed out the fireball despite the affinity disadvantage. If only those bastards would come down here and fight, Knox lamented as she glared at the blazing ball of fire in the sky that was the sun. If it wasn't midday right now, I would be able to shadow step up onto the swords and slit their throats in a single motion. The worst part was that the Grand Elder knew this and was exploiting her weakness by never getting too close to the foliage, always keeping the sun to his back and wrapping his entire body in soul flames to leave no shadows for her to teleport to. While analyzing her opponents, hot on her heels with her spiritual sight, Knox noticed that the Grand Elder seemed to pause as if listening to something. The man then suddenly began pulling back. Having noticed this attack pattern before, Knox stopped fleeing and instead used Shadow Step to keep as close to the Red Claws as possible. Here it comes. Sure enough, a moment later, Nox's spiritual sense went haywire as a volley of spatial bombs tore through the sky and impacted the area she had been moments before. Once again, the firepower on display was ridiculous as the entire ground shook and even reality seemed torn apart for a brief moment. The Red Claws didn't give her a moment's rest and took advantage of her proximity by raining down hellfire, and the light beam was once again hot on her tail, ready to cut her in two if she so much as tripped. This is getting troublesome. Knox hissed through her teeth as she threw bolts of shadow at the Grand Elder. The man floating on the sword far overhead wasn't distracted by the attack for even a second, which was the right choice as the shadow bolts fizzled out long before they could touch his skin. Knox cursed as she had to burn even more chi to use Shadow Step in rapid succession to create some distance. An hour later, Knox had to accept a simple fact: if this onslaught of attacks went on, she wouldn't survive until nightfall. She was slowly being trapped by the rampant forest fires to the east and would soon be boxed in and forced to double back westward toward that floating fortress that seemed to never run out of chi as it hurled relentless volleys of spatial bombs. What the hell were they using to power that thing? Had the Ashfollen Trading Company enslaved a family of spatial cultivators and chained them to the fortress as chi sources? Her only saving grace so far was that the Red Claws flying overhead had stopped casting wide-scale attacks, likely due to running out of chi, and were focusing on throwing more targeted attacks. Even at nightfall, my victory under that floating fortress isn't assured in my current state. I need to keep away from it at all costs. Knox gritted her teeth as she searched for a way out. I need some fucking allies. If only Hammond was here, he could teleport me out within moments. Knox threw herself to the ground as a void-coated claw silently cleaved through the air where her head had just been. If not for the slight change in the shadows, she would have never noticed the monster appearing behind her. Tumbling on the rough ground for a moment before jumping back to her feet, Knox raised both her hands, and hundreds of tendrils of shadows shot forth. As expected, the void beast could easily slash her chi, but that didn't matter. In a battle of attrition, void chi would always lose. The monster then vanished into the void, and Knox didn't waste a second to use Shadow Step to teleport a few meters away. Missed me? Knox smirked as she watched the monster reappear where she had just been. Another victory. Shadow Step was far cheaper chi-wise than Void Step. The monster should retreat if she could keep this up for a bit. The only problem was a single fuck-up would be her end. The monster slowly turned and looked at her with its empty eyes. I'm always ready to dance with death. Knox brought out 2 daggers and coated them in shadow. Do your worst. Another hour passed, and Knox had successfully danced with death. At some point, the void end had retreated and the red clothes overhead were more passive. But that's because they had her trapped. The forest to the north and south had been burned to a crisp. She was currently being forced to slowly head back into the floating fortress's attack range, and Knox was all out of clones. There are clearly spatial cultivators on that ship, so reinforcements could be arriving any moment, Knox cursed. Even if night arrived, her star core had dimmed from overuse. She was mentally and physically exhausted from fighting the void monster. I need help. She whispered words she thought she would never say to herself in the forest silence. There was still a way for her to prevent her seemingly sealed fate of being blasted to death by spatial bombs in the next few hours, but it wasn't one she was happy with. Knox's silver ring flashed as she brought out an artifact she hoped to never use again. Despite the chaotic situation, as she swam through the shadows, she looked at the gold and black pendant of the Eternal Pursuit Pavilion between her fingers with a pained look. Before even activating it, she knew an unpleasant conversation lay ahead, but she saw no other option. Stabbing her finger against the spike in the center of the pendant and letting her warm blood drip onto the artifact's surface along with some chi. It lit up with power a moment later, establishing the connection. Greetings, Knox Duskwoker of the Jade Sentinels. It's been a while. A woman wearing a black cloak embroidered with a phoenix over a lotus on her heart manifested in her mind within a dense fog. It was a mental projection created through the artifact that allowed Knox to speak directly with one of the lowest-ranking members of the Eternal Pursuit Pavilion, and the mere sight of that phoenix symbol made Knox grind her teeth. The phoenix was supposed to symbolize a relentless pursuit and rebirth of justice, but it brought back terrible memories. Now is not the time for small talk, Lotus informant, Knox said with a little more malice than she had intended. I wish to place a bounty. Would that be possible considering how you broke our leader's heart? The woman chuckled, or the large bounty looming over your head. Knox grimaced at the mention of the leader. How much has the bounty reached now? It's been a while since I checked in. The woman's head turned to the side, likely to study something out of view, and then looked back at her with a smile. 30,000 Yingxi coins. One of the highest currently out there. There's someone with a higher bounty than me? Knox asked with interest. Ever since she broke off the arranged marriage with the most powerful family in the Tainted Cloud sect, her betrothed had spared no expense to have her hunted down. But really, 30,000 Yingxi coins. Considering they are a currency unique to the Eternal Pursuit Pavilion that is only obtainable by exchanging artifacts, pills, and technique manuals directly with them or completing missions, that's absurd. Even if I exchanged all I had on me, including these pills I stole from Stella, with the Eternal Pursuit Pavilion, I wouldn't be able to amass that much. Knox hadn't taken on any bounties or missions from the Eternal Pursuit Pavilion in decades. Still, even as a top-ranking Jade Sentinel, she would only get paid around 2,000 to 3,000 Yingxi coins per job she completed. So the fact her bounty had grown to 30,000 was baffling to her. Just how angry was her betrothed? It has been 500 years since then. Yes, there are a few higher ranked since the leader has been suppressing how much your bounty can grow. For instance, Vincent Nitros and the Grand Elder of the Silver Spire family in the Blood Lotus sect are both at 100,000 Yingxi coins. Knox's heart beat a little faster at the mention of the leader's kindness. He was the man she cheated on her betrothed with, after all. It was a messy situation, to say the least. Makes sense that the largest provider of spatial rings and the leader of the rival Blood Lotus sect have the highest bounties. Especially since it's the only demonic sect in the wilderness that refused to allow a branch of the Eternal Pursuit Pavilion to be built. Knox suddenly used Shadow Step to avoid a blast of ash from a tree up ahead. Within the darkness of the foliage, she could make out 8 eyes the size of her fists glaring at her. Shit, the reinforcements have arrived sooner than I thought. The woman in her mind seemed to sense the sudden disturbance. Knox. Are you in a spot of trouble? Why else do you think I would contact those I wished to leave behind? Knox snapped back as she frustratingly headed further west. So, can you process my bounty? I'm running out of time here. The woman sighed. Yes, I can. Please provide details of the target, including their name, location, and threat level. As you already know, the bounty's reward will be decided based on these and more factors. Yes, I know, Knox replied and then spent a second thinking about who she should send her fellow Jade Sentinels after. Before the floating ship activated its illusion array, Knox had seen Stella standing on its bow. Until now, she was still the only one yet to come after her, suggesting she must be the one aiming that blasted light beam at her. If Stella is killed, However they are tracking me would stop. She's also weaker and less well known than the Redclaw Grand Elder, so the bounty will be cheaper to place. I would like to place a bounty on Stella Crestfallen. Her base of operations is the mountain range near Darklight City located in the Blood Lotus sect. However, her current location is on a spiritual ship above the great forest of the Western Wilderness. Knox explained to the woman in her head, and the Lotus informant noted everything. There is no record of Stella Crestfallen, the woman said after a moment. Please explain more so we can give an accurate description to those wishing to take the job. Knox tried her best to recall the girl. She is around 16 years old with short blonde hair, a single red maple leaf earring, and crazed pink eyes. She's also rather tall for a girl and can sometimes be seen wearing a mask or going by the pseudonym of Rosalind. Noted. And what is Stella Crestfallen's strength? The woman asked. Spatial affinity with extremely pure spirit roots. Knox said, I estimate her to be around the first stage of the Star Core realm, and she was also extremely talented with the sword. Interesting, the Lotus informant muttered as they jotted everything down. And what is Stella's affiliation? Is she part of any groups or factions bounty hunters may wish to avoid? Besides being part of the Crestfallen family, which I know little about, she also sells pills on behalf of an entity called the Ashfallen Trading Company while using the pseudonym of Rosalind. The woman paused and then looked to the side and frowned. We also have no records of this Ashfallen Trading Company. What threat level would you describe this group having? Knox glanced up through the foliage at the floating fortress still shrouded in a grand illusion array surrounded by a steady stream of floating corpses that it seemed to be absorbing. Maybe around Star Core 9. The woman raised her brow. Star Core 9. That means only those of equal or higher rank than you should be taking on this job. That will greatly drive up the cost of the bounty. I understand. Knox replied, so how much will the bounty cost? Let me see. An unverified Star Core spatial cultivator with spatial affinity sets the base cost at 3,000 Yingxi coins as they are tricky to track down and kill. Then the fact she is affiliated with such a powerful and unverified faction that sells pills doubles the cost to 6,000 Yingxi coins. Knox winced at the cost. Oh, I forgot to ask, what time limit did you wish to place? Knox looked at the setting sun and sighed. Double the reward if the mission is completed by sundown. Otherwise, keep the base reward for those that complete it by the year's end. Such a tight time limit. Only those groups with a spatial cultivator can complete it in time, the woman said, licking her lips. How interesting. To think the leader's sweetheart would return after decades to place such an interesting bounty. Knox wanted to crawl into a hole and die. She hated being called that. Your bounty has been registered and will appear on all job boards across the wilderness and to everyone's pendants. The woman smiled, but I do wonder, Knox. Looking at your account, you only have 7,000 Yingxi coins in savings. I hope you have items to sell us to make the difference for the double reward. Knox felt her heart freeze. If she failed to pay the double reward on time, she would be forced to pay back the debt to the Eternal Pursuit Pavilion with interest. Also, her standing and reputation within the pavilion would plummet, taking years to recover. I will get the funds somehow, don't you worry, Knox said with an awkward smile. It was a total lie. If someone actually completed the bounty tonight, she was screwed. I can always ask the leader for some help. Another lie, the leader would love for her to be in debt so she could never leave his side. If you say so. Usually, you have to pay it all upfront, but just for you, I will make an exception. The woman faded into the mist. The bounty is now live. Good luck, Knox Duskwalker of the Jade Sentinels. Knox flipped the golden and black pendant over in her hand and saw a new line of spiritual text appear. Death of Stella Crestfallen. Target's estimated threat level, Star Core 1 unverified. Affiliation with Ashfallen Trading Company, Star Core 9 unverified. Bounty, 6,000 Yingxi coins. Double if completed by sundown. The bounty is placed by Knox Duskwalker, and the target is at the marked location. For more information, consult a Lotus informant. Knox deposited the pendant into her spatial ring. It would act as a beacon for those thirsting for the double pay by sundown. Hopefully, Stella being swarmed by bounty hunters will give me a chance to slip past and escape. Knox thought. But if they actually succeed in killing Stella by sundown, I will be fucked as I will have to sell everything I own to pay the double payment. So don't die too fast, Stella Crestfallen. Chapter 222, Lending a Helping Hand. Ashlock let out a sigh as he gazed upon the horizon. The skies were beginning to darken, meaning dusk would soon be upon the land. Which was bad news for Ashlock. Knox would get a massive power-up once the sun vanished, assuming she had any chi to fight. But more concerning was that Ashlock's connection to Willow and the Bastion would be cut once the sun went down, significantly reducing his side's chance of victory. Time till sundown 2:30. 2 hours until sundown, Ashlock muttered as he checked on his chi reserves. They were nearly empty even after he had ceased firing any more spatial bombs an hour ago. At the moment, all he kept running was the illusion array and the Bastion shields. However, his highest expense was the spatial storm spread out for miles in all directions so that he could continue hunting for corpses to replenish his chi through consuming abyss and making portals to help his allies reposition. It was frustrating to be reduced to the support role, but what could he do? The Bastion was incredibly chi-intensive to operate, and he had already drained his offspring for more chi than he was willing to. Ashlock had tried to offer some support with flying swords through portals, but Knox moved far too fast through the darkness, and ironically, the trees and foliage got in the way. So, now Ashlock had resorted to sitting back and depending on his allies to finish the job. Which was going terribly. Like himself, his allies were also struggling with bottoming out chi reserves. As a cultivator rose up the stages within a realm, their total chi capacity would increase. Spending all the chi within one soul wouldn't reduce one stage, as the stage just reflected the total size of the tank. But that tank would need to be refilled through meditation, and it was impossible to ascend to the next stage without a full tank. So, expending chi unnecessarily was foolish and dangerous as it opened one soul to heart demons. Naturally, in this grand and costly battle, the first to run out of chi was Elder Margaret since she was at the first stage and, therefore, had the smallest star core within her. The Grand Elder followed an hour later, and now even Chaos and Soul were running out. Ashlock had even resorted to bringing in Larry to join the fight, but he was also unable to lock the woman down despite the hours of fighting. Ashlock was starting to understand how Knox had survived for possibly hundreds of years until the peak of the Star Core realm in this brutal world. He felt like a farmer with a shotgun and a flamethrower trying to kill a shadow affinity cockroach in the shape of a human that just refused to die. Stella, Ashlock said into the blonde girl's mind. Yes, Tree. Stella looked over her shoulder while still dutifully holding Saul's arm that was shooting out the beam of light at Knox's position. Her blonde hair fell over her face, and she had a cheeky grin. Likely because Stella knew what he was about to ask of her. She had been begging to enter the battle for the last few hours, but it hadn't been time yet. Stella was his trump card. Her spatial step would allow her to match Knox's shadow step. But due to the vast difference in cultivation stages, Stella would run out of chi before she could even land a hit, hence, Ashlock had kept her back here, controlling Saul's arm. But now that Knox had been worn down over the last few hours, Ashlock could finally see hope in sending Stella to exterminate the human cockroach. There's no need to stay here directing that light beam at Knox anymore. Everyone has expended all of their chi, and Larry's ash only helps to create more shadows for Knox to escape through. Ashlock said. He had debated bringing his other ints over, but at this point, Stella was the best fit for the job. Does that mean it's finally my turn? Stella excitedly let go of Saul's arm. Yes, the time for you to fight has finally arrived. Ashlock replied, of course, only if you feel ready and wish to. Stella nodded, I'm ready. I have been dreaming of fighting Knox again for weeks. Ashlock opened a portal, and through the wobbling gateway was the darkened forest illuminated by burning trees. They had been set ablaze by the light beam Stella had been aiming a moment ago, so Knox should be nearby. Stella summoned her favorite black metal sword that Ashlock had gifted her and reached up to touch her single maple leaf earring with her other hand. It was one of the first things Ashlock had ever given her. The A-grade artifact had helped Stella to survive her early years while he was still a weak sapling and unable to offer much help. Stella lowered her hand, took a deep breath and then slowly exhaled. Ashlock saw her excitement dull, and her grin flattened into seriousness. Stella's knuckles whitened as her grip tightened on the sword handle, and her gaze hardened as she focused on the portal before her. In a way, she was about to go and face an unkillable demon. Even though Knox had been severely weakened, she was still 5 stages above Stella and had centuries more battle experience. I'll be back, Tree. Stella said as she stepped forward. Wait for me. Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere. I'm a tree, remember. Ashlock said half-jokingly, stay safe and come back soon. The artifact may be important to us, but your life is far more precious. Stella smiled slightly as the portal seemed to swallow her. Idiot. Who said trees can't fly? And with those parting words, she was gone. The portal snapped closed, and Ashlock's vision blurred as he used Eye of the Tree God to watch the battle from above. Knox came to a stop in the shade of a large tree. She could see the giant ball of spatial chi in the sky through the thicket of the forest in the distance. Due to the illusion array distorting space around the floating island, it was impossible to see what was happening on board. But a while ago, Knox had noticed that the spatial bombs had ceased firing, and now even the light beam that had been following her relentlessly since the battle started had stopped. As the Ashlock Trading Company finally run out of chi, Knox wondered. It was about darn time. The scale of techniques they had thrown at her was ridiculous, and if not for her going all out and focusing on nothing but running, she would be a corpse by now. Her gaze scanned the skyline. The Redclaw elders were in the distance, but without the light beam to guide them, they were looking in the wrong direction. Their backs were turned to her, and the two glanced around in confusion. Should I take this opportunity to pay them back with a knife through the heart? Knox wondered. These two Redclaw bastards had hurled fire and tried to trap her like some kind of rodent for the whole day. The least they deserved was a quick death. But my chi reserves are nearly empty, and I will only be able to recover once the sun fully sets and I get a moment of peace to meditate. Although now seems like a good moment to recover before the light beam starts again. The Redclaws were lost, and Knox hadn't seen the void monster ever since she landed a solid hit on its chest with a flurry of shadow bolts, so all that was left to worry about was the giant spider lurking somewhere. Thankfully, out of all the foes she faced today, the spider was the least mobile, so outrunning it was a breeze. Knox's spatial ring flashed with power, and a porcelain pill bottle appeared in her hand. Quietly popping the cork, she raised the bottle to her mouth and gulped down a few floral-tasting pills that were supposed to revitalize her body. However, accompanying the warm feeling spreading through her body and revitalizing her muscles was a searing hot pain. The pill bottle fell from her hand, smashing on an exposed tree root below. Knox's ears began to ring as she glanced down at the black metal protruding from her chest ablaze with purple soul flames and coated in a sheen of blood. Her blood. The blade was then twisted while still firmly rooted in her lung, causing Knox to involuntarily cough up a mouthful of blood. "TSK," a familiar voice came from behind. "Looks like I just missed your heart by an inch." The sword was then ruthlessly pulled back at a downward angle, drawing even more blood and flesh as it left. It had all been so sudden that Knox's brain had yet to process the absurd situation, but feeling the hole in her chest woke her body up to the sudden danger. Centuries of battle experience ingrained into her very being happened on instinct. Her star core pulsed and flooded her body with shadow chi. The surrounding darkness was pulled in with darkness absorption, and her near-fatal wound began to knit itself back together. Able to breathe again and startled out of her daze, Knox conjured shadow bolts and unleashed them from her back. An explosion occurred a second later as all the trees behind her were obliterated in a shower of splinters, and the sound of cracking wood was followed by the ground trembling as the felled trees fell to the ground. Summoning shadow armor to protect herself from further attacks, Knox looked over her shoulder while wincing from the burning pain still in her chest and surveyed the destruction. There was no one through the debris cloud and among the fallen trees. "Where did you go?" Narrowing her eyes and spreading her spiritual sense, she quickly felt a presence and looked up. In the canopy of the tree, she saw a girl sitting casually on a branch. A black sword hung lazily from her hand, and on the blade's tip, a drop of blood gathered and then dripped to the ground below in the perfect silence. The girl, casually resting her head on her knee, smiled at Knox, getting stabbed in the back. "Hurt, didn't it?" She swung her legs and jumped down from the tree, landing a few meters away. "I apologize that I couldn't make the death of a vermin like you a quick and painless one." Her words sounded sincere and almost sweet, but the insanity and rage in the girl's gaze said otherwise. "So you finally decided to show yourself." Knox spat a glob of blood to the side as she felt the terrible pain in her chest slowly subside. "Stella." A brief flash of surprise appeared on Stella's face at her name, but her smile never faltered. "Yes, I thought I should come and deal with you myself. It's only fair, as I'm the one you stole from, and I have come to take back what belongs to me." "Such arrogance," Knox snorted. "Do you think you have a chance of victory after making me run around like an animal for a few hours and landing a dirty hit on me?" Knox stretched her back and stood at her full height. Shadows wreathed around her entire body, and two daggers of darkness materialized in her hands. Through her spiritual sight, she could feel the Redclaws closing in from behind, But that was fine. She would finish this quickly. You may have showcased great skills with the sword, but you are still a little lamb compared to me. Knox laughed as she stepped forward. You're just a first-stage child with a hardly formed star core. Let me show you what true domain over the world looks like. Knox's star core pulsed. Every tree branch for hundreds of meters instantly snapped and rained to the ground, followed by a shower of leaves. Even the thinner trees and stalks bowed before the gravity of Knox's soul as she walked forward. Stella did not falter. How was she standing so casually while under my soul's pressure? Knox ground her teeth as she increased and focused the pressure even further to little effect. Stella was entirely unbothered, as if something was shrouding her from the pressure. Knox glanced up at the setting sun clearly visible through the now non-existent tree cover. The spatial storm still raged overhead, and if she followed the storm of chi, she could see spatial chi from the storm flowing down and shrouding Stella. She was being protected by another entity that was even more powerful than her. Even by pulling in chi from a storm, she shouldn't be able to withstand the pressure of my soul at the first stage of the star core realm. Knox felt something suspicious was afoot here. Has Stella also somehow grown in strength in such a short time? Are you done tormenting this weak child? Stella seemed amused as sunlight streaked across her face. Then I guess it's my turn. Knox's body and mind froze as one of Stella's eyes suddenly became a swirling abyss. It was so horrifyingly inhuman compared to her other totally normal eye that it made Knox shudder and want to step away. But she couldn't. Her legs felt locked up. Stella took one step forward and vanished in a pop of air. In an instant, Knox regained control of her body. Just in time to react to the ripple of spatial chi to her right. Twisting her body, she awkwardly met the black blade coated in spatial soul fire with her daggers conjured from nothing but her shadows. Yet, instead of blocking the attack, Knox felt a sudden terrible pain. Warm blood showered her face, and her eyes widened in total shock as something slapped her face. Her own hand. What? Knox gasped out as she stumbled backward, and Stella's sword finished its swing, having cleaved through her conjured dagger and then cleanly through her hand. Suppressing a scream, she saw Stella vanish again and reappear crouched over her chopped-off hand, laying haphazardly among the blood-stained foliage. Stella picked up her hand, and while holding it at the wrist, she used it to wave at her while grinning, such an unladylike hand. The many spatial rings adorning the fingers of the hand clinked together, making Knox's skin crawl. You don't mind if this weakling borrows it, do you? No. Give it back, Knox croaked out, but it was already gone. Stella had tossed away her hand into a portal that snapped closed with an audible pop in an instant. Knox lost much of the wealth she had accumulated over centuries and even her own limb. Now, where were we? Stella tilted her head to the side with a crazed grin. Maybe I should take your head next. Chapter 223, Jade Masks. Despite Stella's confident words about taking Knox's head, she made no move to do so for one simple reason. She would likely die. Her overconfidence had been an act from the start. The initial thrust through Knox's lung. A complete stroke of luck. Stella had appeared behind Knox with spatial step right as the towering woman was distracted while eating pills. In a panic to strike before Knox realized someone had materialized behind her, Stella had guessed where Knox's heart was but missed by an inch. Not entirely her fault. Knox's figure was obscured under layers of cloaks, and her body had been hunched over due to one leg being up on an exposed tree root as she ate the pills. Then, I almost had a heart attack when Knox suddenly shot out bolts of shadows from her back with enough force to wipe out a section of the forest. If any of those had hit me, I would have died. Luckily, I reacted in time and teleported to the tree above. Knox ignored Stella's taunting. The woman was too busy gazing at where the portal had snapped closed and took her hand adorned with spatial rings back to the bastion. Despite the distant and unfocused look in her eyes, Stella didn't make the mistake of attacking. If stabbing Knox through the lung had taught her anything, it was that Knox's body was that of a seasoned killer and would react with lethal intent. Which was evident to anyone who looked at her. Stella's earlier comment about Knox's hand being unladylike was true. It had been covered in scars and calluses that reflected a life of battle. Even while distracted, shadows from all around were slithering across the forest floor toward Knox, up her robes, and gathering at her stump, which had stopped bleeding. From these shadows, a new hand was slowly reforming. Her shadow armor remained active, and Stella could see a real sword appear in Knox's remaining hand. The blade tip peeked from Knox's sleeve and glinted in the sunlight. In truth, Stella had been prepared to trade her own arm during that earlier exchange. But to her surprise, her sword wreathed in her soul fire had cleaved through the Nox's conjured weapons, her shadow armor, and even sliced through her skin and bone. When Nox's hand went flying, Stella didn't understand why and just rolled with it. But now that she looked at how the sunlight streaked through the stripped trees overhead and landed on Nox's shadow armor, she could see patches of her cloak underneath. The sunlight significantly reduced the strength of her armor and shadow daggers. If not for Ashlock shrouding me with his chi and my own surge in cultivation over the last month, the second Knox flexed her star core, the battle would have been over. But because of her arrogance, she destroyed the forest around her and, in turn, weakened herself. Knox withdrew her reforming hand into the folds of her black cloak and looked up to stare directly at Stella. Stella suppressed a gulp and refused to break eye contact, keeping her chi ready to spatial step away at a second's notice. The large hood of Nox's cloak and the shadows shrouding her form usually obscured everything but her eyes, and when they had first met, Knox had been wearing a skull mask. But Knox wasn't wearing that creepy mask today, and due to the sunlight, Stella could study Knox in more detail. Has she been using the beauty ointment she stole from me? Apart from the scars on her face, her skin looks relatively smooth. But her face certainly matches her more gruff way of speaking. Stella's hand tightened around her sword hilt when she returned to staring into Nox's eyes. The pure hatred and rage within that gaze made Stella want to turn tail and run. Should I? My earring is most certainly within one of those spatial rings that had been on Nox's hand, as my earring is now pulling me toward the bastion behind me. So, in a way, the battle is won. Although I obviously want this bitch dead for what she did to me. But how? You're stronger than I thought, Knox suddenly said gruffly. She broke eye contact and lowered her head. The large black hood and shadows once again obscured her face from view. Your chi density and speed have improved by a staggering amount since we last fought. I'm impressed. You flatter me, Stella replied as arrogantly as she could while studying Nox's body for a weak point. The shadow armor had clear patches of weakness due to the sunlight, such as her right shoulder and leg, but hitting either of these spots wouldn't secure victory. If a stab through the lungs seemed to hardly faze the woman, a blade through the leg would be a sick joke to her. What is your secret? Knox said, and the sword hidden by her robes slid slightly more into view. You left a sliver of chi behind when retracting your sword from my chest. One does not ascend 3 stages in such a short time. Are you a demon of some kind? No, Stella kept her eyes glued to the blade tip and spread her spiritual sense to the max. The red clothes were almost here, and Larry lurked in the destroyed trees behind Knox. Both of these facts were definitely known to Knox, so why was she wasting time talking? Was Knox trying to buy time to heal her wounds? Had that sword thrust through her lung impacted her more than she was letting on? I hate having such little battle experience. Stella cursed as she debated what to do. Monsters are far easier to deal with than century-old merchants with silver towns. Even if you had access to an unlimited amount of pills like the ones you gave me, such an advancement is impossible, Knox insisted. We have no need to fight. All of this was a misunderstanding, to begin with. Oh yeah? Stella snorted. What misunderstanding could there possibly be? We opened our doors to you. The deal of a lifetime was presented, and you squandered it by stealing that which didn't belong to you. Such arrogance. Knox laughed. If you taught me your cultivation method, I might be inclined to agree about it being the deal of a lifetime, but some pills were worthless compared to the artifact decorating the ears of a clueless child. Ever since I felt their power, I had coveted them. And now I have rightfully taken them back and more. Stella couldn't help but smile. The tense situation was keeping her on edge, but there was a bubbling excitement rising in her chest. She had done it. Knox may still stand alive, but she had heavily injured someone at the peak of the Star Core realm in a fair one-on-one that had seemed like an impossible obstacle in her mind. It really does come down to the environment. Without the sun's help, Knox would have laughed at me as she carved my face in two with those daggers made from her chi. Likewise, I wouldn't have gotten the jump on her if not for the spatial storm blanketing the entire area in spatial chi. After landing some hits and taking my hand and wealth, you may believe you have won. But history is written by the one who lives to tell lies. Knox turned her hooded head and glanced up at the sun, shifting the spots of weakness. There was now one on her neck. And in my eyes, your death is just a matter of time. This story has been stolen from Royal Road. If you read it on Amazon, please report it. Stella didn't wait to hear what Knox had to say. There was an opening, and she planned to take it. Her star core burned with power as she entered the spatial plane. Using her chi, she forcefully collapsed the grids into a single plane, and when she let go, her body was hurled alongside the world righting itself from her manipulation. But while her body was hurled through the compressed space, she saw a massive tear open up through the spatial plane and knew someone powerful was coming. Stella, don't. Ashlock's voice rang in her mind. Pull back quickly. I know. Stella cursed in her mind as she tried to pull herself back the other way, but she was already hurtling through compressed space, and within a fraction of a second, her body lurched forward, and she was now right before Knox. Unlike the previous times, Knox reacted instantly by parrying Stella's sword with the metal sword she had held in her remaining hand. A loud clang reverberated through the forest, and a shower of sparks illuminated Knox's face. The scars across her cheek curved into a vicious smile, filling Stella with dread. It had been a trap all along. Of course, it had been, and like an idiot, she had fallen for it. An immense force that beat the wind out of her lungs sent her and her sword flying in two different directions. Tumbling to a stop on the wet forest floor, Stella grunted as she got back to her feet and summoned the black wooden-handled daggers in a flash of silver while her eyes darted between Knox, who slowly lowered their knee, and her sword nestled in a pile of branches. Why didn't Knox kill me? Stella wondered as she circulated her chi and tried to ignore the pain in her ribs. It doesn't make sense. A blast of shadow bolts at that range would have finished me. Live until nightfall, Knox said cryptically as she turned to face the space behind her that ripped open a second later. Through the portal was the blurry outline of ornate buildings made from jade and two figures. The two people stepped through with measured steps and glanced around. Both wore strange jade masks that hid everything, including their eyes, and much like Knox, they wore baggy black robes that helped conceal their hands. Cousin. Are you all right? The taller of the two with long, messy black hair that covered the top of his mask said to Knox in a calm male voice. I haven't seen you place or take a bounty in a long time and thought you died out here in the boonies playing merchant. Which would have been terrible. The leader only left closed-door cultivation a few months ago, and heaven only knows what he would do if you were dead. Always so foul-mouthed. Knox clicked her tongue. The leader. How is he? The two masked men exchanged a look. He hasn't changed one bit. The black-haired one sighed. The first thing he did after ascending to the 6th stage of the nascent soul realm was try and pick a fight with your betrothed from the Lunar Shade family. The other said, as usual, a section of the sect was destroyed, and your bounty was raised by the Lunar Shade family in retaliation. Did you know it's reached 30,000 Yinxi coins now? Knox nodded. I heard from the Lotus informant. So cousin, have you come to claim my bounty? Everyone knows that bounty is a joke to keep the Lunar Shade family at bay. Knox's cousin laughed. Can you imagine me bringing your head on a silver platter to the leader? I may walk out with the bounty, but I would be surprised if our family wasn't wiped out by sunrise in his childish rage. What a tyrant. Knox laughed. The two newcomers nodded. What are they talking about? Bounty. Lotus informant. Stella wondered. All three of them practically ignored her, so while listening intently, she tried to use telekinesis to regain her sword but found herself unable to. What? Why is my chi not responding to me? Don't bother trying. The shorter blonde-haired man said. His voice was muffled and altered by the jade mask. I didn't waste a month of spatial chi getting over here for my bounty to escape. This bastard knows how to use spatial lock, Ashlock said in her mind, and Stella agreed. It felt similar to when Ashlock tested it on her, but it was like an iron grip. Nothing was making sense. Why wasn't Knox trying to kill her now that she had allies? Why were these men so casual with her standing right here? She could tell from a glance they were far above her in cultivation. Did they just see her as an insignificant bug they could crush after their little chat? Now, cousin, I have a question. The black-haired man stepped forward and placed a firm hand on Knox's shoulder. What trick are you playing? 12,000 Yinxi coins to kill this star core brat. Have you gone insane? Or is this an elaborate trap of some kind? Stella's face paled. There was a bounty on her head. Knox laughed. As a merchant, you should know how frugal and careful with money I am. I believe 12,000 Yinxi coins to be a reasonable price, and if you don't believe me. Knox looked over her shoulder at Stella, then I challenge you to try and kill her by nightfall. Stella, run, Ashlock said urgently, and Stella felt a ripple through space to her back. A portal had appeared behind her, and through it, she could see the surface of the bastion. She didn't think twice and bolted toward it as she couldn't use spatial step. There was another spatial cultivator here. The blonde man cursed in a distorted voice and materialized before Stella a second later, blocking the path to the portal. He raised a sword ablaze with impure spatial flames as if ready to execute her. Stella activated her earring, and the man froze up like a statue at her eldritch gaze. Skidding past him, she threw her body through the portal and ate the stone of the bastion. "Close it," Stella shouted as she looked over her shoulder at the still wide-open portal. "Why would I say no to free snacks?" Ashlock said with a chuckle, "Just sit back and relax. You did a fantastic job." Another portal opened, and her sword dropped before her. Reaching for it, Stella saw a void lake spread out from Willow. "You're such a glutton," Stella smirked as she stood up and waved at the spatial cultivator with a beaming smile. "I wonder which one of these fools Ashlock will enjoy eating the most." Stella considered as the two Jade Mask bounty hunters stepped through, their bodies ablaze with soul flames as the portal collapsed behind them. Chapter 224, Bounty Hunters. Ashlock had not foreseen this turn of events as the two Jade Mask bounty hunters stepped foot on the bastion, but he wasn't exactly complaining. He wasn't often handed walking meat bags of sacrificial credits on a silver platter like this. Devouring these two will have made this costly battle worth it. Ashlock reined in his hunger and wandering thoughts and focused. The two were still threats despite them confidently walking into an area where he was at his strongest. In fact, if he didn't handle this perfectly, it could go very wrong. Since both cultivators coated their bodies in soul fire to protect themselves from an ambush, he knew their affinities as they stepped through. Spatial and shadow. Unfortunately, since mutations didn't carry over through progeny dominion, Ashlock could not discern their exact strength through his demonic eye still, from how they spoke to Knox and the fact that the blonde one could use spatial lock, a relatively high-level technique. Ashlock estimated them to be no weaker than Knox at the 9th stage. The moment the bounty hunters appeared in the forest, Ashlock opened portals to evacuate the Redclaw elders back to Red Vine Peak, as he knew they stood no chance since they were out of chi. Knox's cut-off hand had also been sent back there and was waiting for him to crack open those spatial rings and seize their riches. With the Redclaws and the hand now safe and sound, Ashlock could entirely focus on slaughtering these bounty hunters who dared go after Stella, and then he would focus back on Knox. Hopefully, this fight will only take a moment. Ashlock really didn't want Knox to get away, but he didn't have anyone capable of chasing her alone without risk of death. He had brought Larry back to the bastion via a portal to join forces with Stella, whom he had just rescued, and Soul. "Hold on," the dark-haired man raised his hand to stop his companion as the portal snapped closed behind him, and he glanced around. "This place should belong to the Ashfullen Trading Company. So what if it belongs to them?" The blonde one with spatial affinity snapped back. "Our bounty is right before us beside that demonic tree." They were trying to obscure their voices with chi, but that wouldn't work when they stood on the bastion, which was within Ashlock's realm of influence. Long-range combat and chasing people who knew of his nature like Knox was a fool's errand, but if someone chose to fight him on his own land, they became the fools. Ashlock became far stronger near his trunk than his cultivation realm suggested due to his system-granted abilities that he could use without restraint through his progeny and his vast amount of chi. "Although I don't have much chi on hand to fight with," Ashlock mused as he browsed his status screens, "so I will have to defeat them with system abilities. Don't be rash. This place reeks of a trap, and although unverified, my cousin listed the Ashfullen Trading Company as a Star Core 9 level threat, and I trust her judgment." The black-haired one insisted, and he was right. It was a trap, and if the two didn't react in the next few seconds, they would be dead. They were so focused on the tree ablaze with spatial flames and Stella standing beside it, smirking at them, that they overlooked the void lake slowly creeping toward them through the crevices of the black rock. "But there's nobody here," the blonde man said. It would seem he didn't consider Soul, who stood off to the side, to be anything more than a glorified lamp, and Willow as a dumb tree. "A part of me wonders if Knox sent these people to die," Ashlock mused as the void lake crept ever closer. A warning to stay away from suspicious trees would have gone a long way in increasing their chances of survival. After some hesitancy, the dark-haired man lowered his hand that had been blocking the blonde man, and the two took a step forward while summoning swords to their hands. In sync, they strode toward Stella and their deaths. "Stella, I am going to attack them in a moment. Get ready to jump," Ashlock said through abyssal whispers. A flash of confusion appeared on her face, but her eyes darted to Soul, and then she gave a small nod of understanding. Ashlock needed both bounty hunters to be as incapacitated as possible for his plan to work. Soul would handle the darkness cultivator, and he would deal with the spatial one. Ashlock focused intently on the ripples of the blonde-haired man's soul and prepared to use chi resonance. Clearly, this cultivator was far above him in cultivation stages, so much like Larry, this man would win in a battle of soul ripples. But due to how the technique worked, if, for a split moment, he matched the man's soul ripples, the cultivator would need to spend a second to regain control and overpower him, which was all the time he needed. Soul, get ready to flashbang them in 3, 2, 1. Now. Ashlock shouted, and the ent obeyed its master's orders. The dim floating orb of light that acted as Saul's head used up the last of its chi to send out a wave of chi-filled light. There was no such thing as protection from friendly fire in this world, so upon his suggestion, Stella jumped up into Willow's canopy, where Larry was also lurking, to shield herself from the intense flashbang. Thankfully, Ashlock was using his Eye of the Tree God skill, unaffected by the intense chi-filled light. He could see the two bounty hunters. Neither seemed blinded by the light, and Ashlock suspected it was because of their jade masks, which suddenly glowed with power. So they aren't just there to conceal their identity by hiding their face and distorting their voice. They are actual defensive artifacts. Ashlock concluded but decided to go ahead with his plan anyway. The next step was to activate abyssal whispers on them so he could distract them with illusions and words within their minds, but the skill bounced off them as if they were stone walls. The jade masks glowed even more. No dice, huh? Ashlock was starting to suspect this wouldn't be as easy as he had hoped. The only success from his series of attacks thus far was that the flash of light had wiped out a layer of the dark-haired man's shadow armor. Targeting the blonde man, Ashlock focused on the ripples of his soul and used spatial lock. The man immediately noticed his attempt as his head snapped toward Willow, but it was too late. From their blind spot near their feet, tendrils of void shoot up and the blonde man could not use spatial step to escape. A loud, distorted cry rang, followed by a thud as the blonde man was impaled by the void and fell flat on his face. Dead. But his more cautious companion managed to barely jump back in time. Conjuring a wave of shadows from his hands like a flamethrower, he blasted the void tendrils chasing after him. The void and darkness clashed, and Ashlock watched as credits evaporated from his system screen at an alarming rate. This story has been stolen from Royal Road. If you read it on Amazon, please report it. Reeling the void lake back toward Willow, his credits stopped plummeting. Void chi was great for piercing defenses and absorbing attacks but was expensive. Okay, 1 down and 1 to go. I had hoped to kill them both in that series of attacks, and I would have if not for those darn jade masks. Ashlock tried to think quickly of a way to kill this shadow bastard. If he escaped now after seeing his capabilities, the man would become a cockroach like his cousin, who should be deathly afraid of trees by now. Bringing Zeus or Titus over here would be useless as they were both too slow and noticeable with their attacks, and much like Knox, this man had shadow affinity, and he knew firsthand how troublesome this affinity was to deal with. Hold on. I got an idea. The dark-haired man slowly walked forward, blasting the area before him in dark flames. Stella crestfallen, there's no need to make this difficult for the Ashfullen Trading Company, he called out as he kicked the blonde man's body onto his back and bent down to pull free the spatial rings from the corpse's fingers. Just accept defeat. You may have killed this idiot with that cheap attack, but I won't be so simple. Stella and Larry bait him into a duel. Cover each other's backs. Ashlock instructed, get him to come as near to Willow as possible. I'm going to summon a dimension of light. As you command, Master, Larry replied gruffly and crawled down from Willow's canopy. Due to the demonic tree being so young and short, Larry could make his way down to the ground in one go by extending his front legs. While they got into position, Ashlock used dimensional overlap to summon its menu and quickly found a pocket realm filled with light chi. What in the 9 realms? The dark-haired man cursed under his breath as Larry fully emerged. A guardian beast. He hastily reeled in his shadow flames, abandoned his efforts of looting the corpse, and raised his sword. He's something like that, Stella said casually as she leapt down, stood beside Larry, and patted his giant leg as if he were a friendly pet. Isn't he handsome? Stop messing with me. The man's expression wasn't visible due to the mask, but from his panicked, distorted voice, the appearance of Larry had stripped much of his arrogance. Stella laughed. Is the bounty hunter terrified of spiders? Despite her quite effective mocking, Ashlock could see Stella's gaze that never left the intruder become tranquil. Her bloodline had likely activated. Not even a moment later, the now enraged man used Shadow Step to close the gap almost instantly. Stella casually raised her sword to meet the man's and looked at him as if bored through the shower of sparks. Such cheap tricks don't work on the observant, Stella sneered behind her blade. Compared to your cousin, you lack finesse. Sometimes, Ashlock marveled at Stella's trash talk, considering her arms were quivering under the pressure, and she was on the back foot. Now would be a good time to strike back with his void tendrils as they were locked up in an attack. But Ashlock didn't want the man to retreat. He had him right where he wanted him. Larry, now. Ashlock activated Dimensional Overlap after selecting the purest light chi pocket realm he could find and set the size to encompass the entire bastion. 800 credits vanished from his system, leaving him with around 1,000 as a bubble of light chi rapidly expanded outward. The ring of ash orbiting Larry's crown of horns sped up, and an immense pressure blanketed the area. The giant spider then raised one of his front limbs and smashed down on the cultivator, knocking him off balance and flooring him alongside the pressure from his gravity. Stella was also hit by Larry's gravity and struggled to remain standing. But none of that mattered. Everyone became bathed in a golden and blinding light as if they had been teleported into the center of the sun. The darkness chi shrouding the man's body rapidly evaporated away like steam. The environment was simply too much of a counter for his chi. He attempted to stagger to his feet, but Larry's pressure kept him suppressed. Ashlock was losing credits by the second, but there was something he needed. Stella, the man can hardly stand. Could you try getting some information from him regarding the Tainted Cloud sect? Nodding her head, Stella kept her distance. She placed the tip of her sword under the man's chin and then forced him to look up at her. Bounty Hunter, tell me about the Tainted Cloud sect if you want to live. I know your cousin placed a bounty on me, so speak. At this point, the dark-haired man had to be burning his star core to its absolute maximum as the amount of darkness chi evaporating off his back reminded Ashlock of a coal power plant's chimney. I am one of many, the man said through his jade mask, and even with the distortion, the pain in his tone was evident. So long as that bounty hangs over your head, they will not stop until you die. You can run to the other side of the realm, and they will still follow. That is what it means to become the enemy of the eternal pursuit. That doesn't answer my question, Stella said, but fell silent. The jade mask of the bounty hunter cracked in two. As the two pieces fell to the ground, a phantom-like creature sprung out of the man's mouth at Stella. She remained calm as she stepped back and sliced the creature in two with her sword. Was that a heart demon? It seems his chi has fallen low enough that his suppressed heart demons were unleashed, Ashlock said, noticing dark flames pouring out of the man's eyes, mouth, and ears. He was going supernova. The bastard is going supernova after losing his soul to the heart demons. Ashlock cursed and used consuming abyss. Hundreds of void tendrils and many black vines covered in thorns began devouring the man. Cultivate with one eye open, Stella crestfallen. The man choked out as he was devoured alive by the abyss. If they are all as foolish as you, then I will welcome them with open arms. Stella stepped forward, ramming her sword through his skull, killing him instantly. She reached into the wiggling mass of vines, cut off his hand with many spatial rings, and stepped back with it. Plus 824 SC. The supernova was prevented, and the void devoured the man, leaving nothing behind. Not even a scrap of cloth survived. Chapter 225, Snack Delivery. As Ashlock cancelled the dimensional overlap and the light chi bubble collapsed, he realized he might have gone overboard. He had chosen from the long list of options in the dimensional overlap menu a pocket realm with near-nascent soul-level light chi and had set it to encompass the entire bastion, which at the time had seemed reasonable. However, he had failed to foresee how badly it would affect the dark-haired man who cultivated darkness chi. The man had been hardly able to fight back, let alone escape, under the intense light as if he were being eaten alive. The man gave 824 credits, but I spent over 800 to kill him with the dimensional overlap and the void tendrils. Ashlock sighed. I wonder if delaying his death to ask him a question also reduced the number of credits I received, as he burned away a lot of his chi before dying. Ashlock still wasn't sure of the man's true strength, but he felt a bit easier to kill compared to Knox, so he was likely closer to the 7th or 8th stage of the Star Core realm rather than at the peak, which would have also contributed to the lower sacrificial credit gain. You gluttonous tree. Stella scolded as she held up a cut-off hand that was still dripping blood on the black stone of the bastion. If I hadn't dived in there to cut off his hand, the spatial rings would have been eaten. Blame Willow, his hunger distracted me, Ashlock replied half-jokingly. Since they shared a body, Willow's emotions and feelings were impossible to ignore. He could override and suppress them to an extent, of course, but the black vines had originated from Willow's body, so the young tree that only just reached Star Core realm got its first taste of high-stage human flesh. You're just a bad parent to them. Stella waved him off with her extra hand, spraying blood everywhere, which only made Willow hunger more. You should teach them some restraint. I almost lost my own hand to the vines and void tendrils. Do you really think I am a bad parent? Ashlock felt a little wounded. He thought he was a rather good parent, all things considered. He was great at listening and sometimes dropped gifts on people's heads. What more could someone expect from a tree? I was joking, Stella chuckled as she walked over to the once blonde-haired man's headless corpse. You raised me, and I turned out just fine, right? Okay, maybe she has a point. Ashlock muttered to himself as he watched her crouch down and pull free 2 spatial rings the other guy had failed to steal a few minutes earlier. Right? Stella insisted. Yes, Stella, you turned out perfectly. Ashlock reluctantly agreed. Who was he as a man-eating tree that was lazy and forgetful sometimes to judge someone else's personality issues? Okay, she had many problems that were partially his fault, but life wouldn't be as fun without them. Or so he liked to think. Stella just smiled at his response while humming a pleasant tune to herself. After depositing the spatial rings in her pocket, she turned on her heel and shouted, "Here, Willow, catch." She tossed the now ringless hand that had belonged to Knox's cousin across the bastion, and without Ashlock doing anything, a black vine shot up like a snake and snagged the hand. Ashlock felt a wave of happiness as Willow devoured the snack. Willow says thank you. Ashlock relayed the tree's feelings. I know, Stella replied as she walked back over, so what should we do now? Is there any point going after Knox? Let me see if she is still lurking around, but considering that fight took longer than I expected, she is probably long gone by now. Ashlock still had the spatial storm encompassing the wilderness for many miles, and the sun was still overhead, albeit nearing its conclusion for the day. So using Eye of the Tree God, he scanned the mostly burned forests and tried to feel for traces of shadow chi. There was indeed a faint trace he could follow, but in the few minutes he had spent engaged in combat, she had already escaped his sphere of influence. He searched for another hour and even expanded the spatial storm further but could not catch up. Which was deeply frustrating. Ashlock knew he wasn't a tactical genius and had likely messed up somewhere. Still, everything that happened today was so far from his expectations that he didn't know how many contingency plans he would have needed. I expected Knox to either have been turned into a tree, deeply weakened, or at least poisoned and cursed. But instead, she was as strong as before, had an environmental advantage by hiding in a massive forest, and did everything she could to run rather than fight. Ashlock couldn't help but sigh. If he had known it would be such an ordeal, he would have tried to bribe Maple to come and throw everything he had at her immediately. It was my mistake for putting so much faith in my SSS grade skill Skyborn Bastion. Although it can move, its primary purpose is for defensive battles on home ground. The fact it moves this slow outside of my route range lets Knox simply outrun the range of its artillery and forces me to waste so much chi on expanding out the spatial storm as far as possible so I could assist my allies. Ashlock looked to the distant horizon and saw the sun was setting. Time till sundown, 0:30. Whatever, this was a great learning experience, and even with Knox escaping, I got a lot out of it. Ashlock returned his attention back to the bastion. Couldn't find her. Stella asked the moment he returned. She was busy, leaning against Willow and seemed to be trying to break the seal on one of the spatial rings. The fight took too long so she could get away, Ashlock replied, and without your earring to track down her exact location and with night approaching, it's pointless to try and chase after her. Night, huh? Stella mumbled as she drew her attention away from the ring and looked at the darkening horizon. Something up. I don't know why, but Knox told me to live until nightfall. Stella shook her head. What a confusing woman. She went from trying to murder me to helping me when those bounty hunters arrived. That is strange. Ashlock ran the conversation he overheard through his mind and tried to piece together the puzzle. Say, Stella, the cousin mentioned coming here because Knox had placed the bounty on your head. You don't suppose she wanted you to live so she didn't have to pay the bounty? This story has been stolen from Royal Road. If you read it on Amazon, please report it. Stella tapped her chin, possibly. But didn't the black-haired guy mention before he died that the bounty hunters would keep coming no matter what? If she didn't want to pay the bounty, why would it matter if I died tonight or next week? That's true. Ashlock mulled. I suppose the only way she could get out of paying the bounty now is if she kills you herself. Stella glanced over to the dead body. That seems plausible, considering she offered no words of advice to these fools and even distracted them with conversation when they arrived. It really did seem like she wanted them to fail. I wonder when Knox will return seeking my head. A moment of silent contemplation passed between the two. Say, Stella, you don't feel scared, do you? What about? The bounty on your head, of course. Ashlock sighed. There will be people trying to kill you all the time now. Stella tilted her head in confusion. So, how's that much different from my life until now? I've almost died so many times I'm starting to wonder if I really did die one of those times, and I'm just a ghost now sent to haunt you. Mistress Stella, Larry attempted a bow. Don't worry, I will protect you from these pests. Thank you, Larry, Stella said sincerely and then patted Willow's bark, but I have nothing to worry about. So long as I am near Ash, I feel safe. Ashlock felt happy that Stella had faith in him but feared it was misplaced. When fighting near his trunk or offspring, he was far stronger than his cultivation stage suggested. Still, even these advantages wouldn't bridge the gap between himself and their supposed leader, who had a thing with Knox and was in the middle stages of the nascent soul realm. To think the Tainted Cloud sect has a nascent soul realm expert as well, Ashlock said, but he had to admit the gravity of the realm had diminished somewhat after his brief encounter with nascent soul Azure clan members during his last Mystic Realm visit. I need to remember I only stood a chance back then because they were all spatial affinity cultivators, which made the Bastion's shields very effective against their onslaught. What would a void or cosmic nascent soul realm cultivator be capable of? Would I even know how I died? They should have multiple, Stella muttered a reply regarding his earlier point. They said something about a Lunar Shade family raising Knox's bounty, and apparently, their leader went on a rampage within the sect, but someone was able to stop him. You're right. Ashlock replied. So why haven't they invaded the Blood Lotus sect? As far as I know, we only have Vincent Nitros in the nascent soul realm. Stella shrugged. Your guess is as good as mine. But if I had to speculate, I would assume either the Blood Lotus Patriarch is stronger than we know or there are some politics we are unaware of. This thing is so hard to open. Stella huffed the hair out of her face and seemingly gave up on breaking the spatial ring seal. I'll break the seals when I wake up tomorrow, Ashlock promised. He was at a higher cultivation stage than Stella and had far more chi to throw at the problem. Fine, Stella slowly collapsed against Willow's bark and ended up sitting on one of his roots with her back to them. So, are we heading back now? Wait. Panic appeared in her eyes. We don't need to fly all the way back, right? This darn bastion is too slow. I will die of boredom before the bounty hunters get to me. Relax. Since a fragment of my soul has temporarily bonded with Willow, I can open a portal to bring the bastion back to Red Vine Peak in seconds. Oh, thank the 9 realms, Stella seemed genuinely relieved. Was cultivating inside the bastion for a day or two really that bad? Ashlock wondered. That aside, he decided to do one last thing with only a few minutes remaining on Progeny Dominion. The landscape down below was devastating for him to look at. So many trees had pointlessly died, so he wanted to ensure their deaths were not in vain and that a new forest took root from their ashes. Hundreds of portals opened up throughout the spatial storm that still raged across the land. A single fruit containing a demonic seed fell to the ground from each. No monster corpses were left to speed up their growth as he had eaten them all. But the chi within the fruit alone would mean a forest would appear here within a few months. I wonder what Knox's reaction will be if she ever returns and passes by a random forest of demonic trees. Ashlock was still slightly annoyed that Knox had escaped, but so long as that bounty remained on Stella's head, she might return. Say, Stella, Ashlock pondered as he reeled in the spatial storm and prepared to leave. You know how there's a bounty on your head and supposedly strong cultivators will travel across the realm to claim it? Yeah. Stella looked up at Willow's canopy. What about it? Doesn't that mean an endless stream of snacks will be knocking on our door soon? Ashlock realized he had been focusing on how much danger this put Stella and him in, which was a definite cause for concern. But what about the positives? An endless stream of clueless cultivators heading for their deaths in the name of a bounty sounded like a good opportunity. Stella nodded. Seems like it from what we know so far. Okay, let's head back quickly and prepare. Ashlock's chi surged through the ethereal root connection, and an enormous portal manifested between the bastion and the distant setting sun. He would need to set up better and stricter defenses around Red Vine Peak and conduct more research into these Eternal Pursuit people as soon as possible. But first, he deserved a well-earned sleep, counting his newfound riches and deciding what to spend his sacrificial credits on. He still had the blonde-haired cultivator's corpse to eat, but he needed to determine if he first wanted to draw the gotcha with the 2,480 credits he currently had saved up. Chapter 226, Slothful Tree. After directing the bastion back to Red Vine Peak through the portal, Ashlock parked the floating fortress on the eastern side of the mountain peak to once again obscure it from Darklight City that lay to the west. Since the bastion was now stationary as a star core tree, Willow could power the illusion array himself, but it would slow down his cultivation, so it wasn't worth it. Red Vine Peak was 8,000 meters up, so Ashlock just had to make sure the floating rock wasn't visible to Darklight City, where cultivators from other families were attending the academy. The fractured part of his soul returned to his body, accompanied by a surge in chi. Despite the dark-haired cultivator and many monsters he had devoured today, it barely put him on the brink of ascending to the 8th stage. A shame, but I did spend a stupid amount of chi running the bastion. The giant portal snapped closed with a rather loud pop, sending a rush of air that rustled the leaves of every demonic tree on the mountain peak and announced their return to those waiting. Stella hopped off the bastion and had the blonde-haired man's body floating beside her with telekinesis. Diana and the Red Clothes awoke from meditating under the demonic trees and walked across the peak toward her. "Mistress Stella, I am so glad to see you are safe," the Grand Elder said sincerely with his hands clasped behind his back. "I was heading over to assist you with Knox when the Immortal recalled us through portals back here. So, what happened? Where is Knox?" Stella sighed. "She got away." The Grand Elder closed his eyes for a moment. "How unfortunate. That woman has much to pay for after the ruckus she caused during the merchant meeting." "Who's the headless guy?" Diana asked. Stella glanced at the floating corpse beside her, "A bounty hunter. They were sent by Knox after me and were why she managed to escape." "Bounty hunters." Elder Margaret's eyes widened. "Did you get any more information about them?" "From the conversation I overheard, Knox placed a bounty on my head for 12,000 Yinxi coins." Stella rubbed her chin and thought, "Oh, and when the other bounty hunter died, he said something about an eternal pursuit. Does that mean anything to you too?" The Redclaw elders exchanged a concerned look. "The Eternal Pursuit Pavilion is a well-known faction throughout the wilderness," the Grand Elder explained. "It's unclear where they originally started, but they have a presence within every major demonic sect. Those Yinxi coins are their unique currency stored on site, which can be exchanged for anything you could think of at any of their pavilions. If they happen to lack what you seek, merchants or bounty hunters can be hired to complete the job. Whether that be a certain pill you need or someone's head on a silver platter." "Why have I never heard of them?" Diana asked as she stopped inspecting the floating corpse. "The Eternal Pursuit Pavilion was banished from the Blood Lotus sect by the Patriarch a long time ago as they caused fighting among the noble families," Elder Margaret said, "so unless you have interacted with those from other demonic sects or had a bounty placed on your head, it's unlikely you would have heard of them." "I see," Diana nodded. "So what's the plan? Is there a way to clear the bounty?" "Not that I know of," the Grand Elder replied, "since the Yinxi coins are stored on site, and the payment for the bounty is taken when it's set. So even if the person who placed the bounty dies, the bounty will remain active. The only thing I could suggest is attempting to fake your own death or joining the Eternal Pursuit Pavilion and paying off the bounty yourself." "Wait, you can do that?" Stella asked. The Grand Elder nodded. "Of course. Anything you can think of can be bought with Yinxi coins, including your own freedom. However, if the person who placed the bounty really wants you dead, they can keep bidding higher." "Could Stella become a bounty hunter then and clear her own name?" Ashlock asked through abyssal whispers. He was somewhat surprised when hardly anyone winced at his words. Only Elder Margaret seemed to need to pop a Mind Fortress pill. Assuming she could make it alive to one of the branches to register in another demonic sect, Elder Margaret said, "Stella does have a rather large bounty on her head after all. It's been years since I last heard anything about the Eternal Pursuit Pavilion, but last I checked, a bounty over 3,000 was considered high." "Damn," Stella clicked her tongue but then seemed to have an idea as she turned to Diana. "Why don't you become a bounty hunter? Knox won't recognize you after your transformation." "That's a good idea," Ashlock interjected. "After the deal with the merchants fell through, we need somewhere to sell our pills, not just for our sake but also for Riker Silverspire, who has placed his trust in us. If Diana became a bounty hunter of the Eternal Pursuit Pavilion, she could trade our pills in for these Yinxi coins, which can be exchanged for anything we need. That's not a bad idea, the Grand Elder nodded in agreement. Although there are some issues. The main advantage of selling pills through merchants is it obscures the pill source. This is why merchants often trade with one another or travel to different demonic sects. We can come up with a solution to that, Ashlock replied. Anything else? Crossing the wilderness takes a long time, and depending on how many monsters you encounter along the way, it can be a costly endeavor on a person's cultivation, Elder Margaret said. We are getting sidetracked from my original question, Diana grumbled and then put a firm hand on Stella's shoulder. Why are you not more concerned? She said while shaking Stella back and forth. There will be more of these bounty hunters, right? How will you cultivate in peace with these people after you? Stella looked between Diana and the headless corpses floating beside her. You mean this guy? Yes. Does he look threatening to you? Stella asked as she used telekinesis to make the corpse wave. Diana grunted in frustration and rolled her eyes. Joking aside, yes, they are threatening, Ashlock said before Diana lost it. He knew Stella was just messing around to bring attention away from the issue herself, as nobody would be able to stop looking over their shoulder knowing such a large bounty was on their head. Her way of dealing with stress was a little unconventional sometimes. Say, Grand Elder, will they always appear alone or in small groups? If you spot this story on Amazon, know that it has been stolen. Report the violation. The Grand Elder nodded. The bounty is split between those who participate, so they will find a balance between a group big enough to get the job done but small enough that the cut is worth it. I see, how interesting. Ashlock tried to sound as whimsical as possible while asking relatively simple questions to maintain his immortal persona. And what about their strengths? Will Nascent Soul bounty hunters appear? One of them mentioned that their leader had just left closed-door cultivation and reached the 6th stage of the Nascent Soul realm. Oh, don't worry about that, the Grand Elder waved him off. They would never move for a bounty this low and especially not for one of unverified strength. The man gestured to the floating corpse. Those that live long enough to reach Nascent Soul are cautious and calculating rather than great risk takers like this headless fellow. Unverified. What does that mean? When a bounty is placed, the person will estimate the target strength. For example, Stella might be a star core 4 level threat. The Grand Elder smiled, very impressive at such a young age, I might add, but I digress. Her level of strength will be tagged as unverified until a few more bounty hunters agree on the assessment. So if we kill every bounty hunter before they can report back, it will remain unverified. Correct. The Grand Elder nodded, and there is no way to tell how many fools lost their lives to an unverified bounty, as people don't have to report that they took on a job. Diana frowned. Couldn't bounty hunters create fake bounties to lure people and rob or kill them? The Grand Elder laughed. That happened quite often. Hence, few people go after unverified bounties. The only mark of legitimacy is who placed the bounty. Ah. Stella clapped her hands, a look of realization on her face. Knox's cousin mentioned only coming because he saw it was Knox who placed the bounty. So there won't be bounty hunters coming after Stella because she is unverified? Ashlock asked and managed to suppress his yawn while doing so. The sun had fallen below the distant mountains a moment ago, and he felt ready to sleep. Oh, there will, especially for the 12,000 Yinxi coins on offer. The Grand Elder replied, it would be far more if Stella's strength was verified. Thank you for the surprisingly insightful information, Grand Elder. Where did you learn all of this? It was many, many years ago, but during the peak of the war, I was a member of the Eternal Pursuit Pavilion. It was very helpful being able to restock on supplies and buy information. The Grand Elder looked off into the distance with a glint of nostalgia in his eyes, but then the Patriarch had a falling out with them and managed to push the entire organization out of the sect and forbade anyone from having a membership with them, so I turned my pendant in. His voice then dropped low. Although there are rumors that the Silver Spire family still maintains a connection and uses them to distribute their spatial rings to other demonic sects, and Vincent Nitros turns a blind eye because he gets a cut. I see. Tell Sebastian and Riker Silver Spire to come here tomorrow at noon. Ashlock said, I want to speak to them about a few things. As you wish, the Grand Elder bowed deeply toward the demonic tree that lorded over the mountain peak. Take these fire chi fruits with you as well to help recover the chi you spent today fighting Knox. Ashlock floated over a few spicy fire fruits from his branches. The Red Clothes took the fruit, gave their thanks, and after being dismissed, They took off on their flying swords toward the Whitestone Palace. Diana shook her head. This is crazy. How did this all happen in a single day? I thought Knox was supposed to be an easy target. Her shoulders then sagged. You should have brought me. You only just reached the Star Core realm, and lack a movement skill capable of keeping up with Knox, Ashlock explained. Your strength is exceptional, but Knox had no intentions of fighting. She just ran and ran, hoping to stall until nightfall. Yeah, that's fair, Diana sighed. I'm still lagging behind. But we will be fine, right? We can defeat these bounty hunters. If they keep coming in small groups, it shouldn't be a problem, Ashlock replied. Unlike facing the Void Mind or Skyren families that have hundreds of cultivators and will come in waves and would not stop until Red Vine Peak and my total destruction. These bounty hunters will come in smaller groups and only want Stella's head. Because of this tunnel vision on one person due to the bounty, we can exploit it by forcing them to fight near my trees. Fine, fine, I trust your judgment. Diana smiled wearily. You two want to rest, right? I can take the night watch. With that said, majestic raven wings sprouted from her back, and she took to the skies in a single leap. Thanks, Diana. Stella called after her and sighed as she collapsed onto the bench under Ashlock's canopy. Say, Tree, what do you want to do with this guy? She asked while pointing at the floating corpse. Good question. Just place him on the ground for now. Alright, Stella released her telekinetic control, letting the corpse collapse to the ground like a puppet cut from its strings. Opening his sign-in system, Ashlock checked on his current amount of credits. Idolatry daily sign-in system. Day, 3,563. Daily credit, 11. Sacrifice credit, 2,480. Sign-in. Should be enough for an S-grade draw, Ashlock mused. The corpse should provide me around 1,000 credits as it's a spatial affinity, and the guy didn't have a chance to fight back before he died. Do I sign in now for a gotcha draw and then eat the corpse to have some credits on hand? Or should I eat the corpse to guarantee an S+ grade draw but then have no credits? No, that would be stupid, especially with the threat of the bounty hunters. But having over 3,000 credits sitting around feels like a waste. Mulling over his thoughts for a while longer and yawning, Ashlock eventually decided what to do. System sign-in. Sign-in successful, 2,491 credits consumed. Upgraded Hibernate C- Nocturnal Genesis S. Ashlock felt the information flood his mind, and he had never been more excited to sleep in his life, which was saying something, considering he was a very slothful tree. His new S-grade skill had no cost in either sacrificial credits or chi to activate or use, which was a breath of fresh air, and even more importantly, it rewarded him for doing his favorite activity, sleeping. The only restriction was that the skill was only available during the night. When I activate the skill, I will go into a deep slumber. While asleep, the growth rate of my body, roots, and fruit will be increased up to tenfold depending on the phase of the moon. I will also be able to cultivate the lunar energies, which not only progress my cultivation stage but also nourish and heal my soul. Ashlock thought the soul healing alone warranted this being an S-grade skill, but there was more. This skill also extends to all my offspring within my root network, so during the night, all my offspring are also able to cultivate and will grow 10 times faster in size. Ashlock thought back to the forest of demonic trees he was growing out in the wilderness. If he managed to link his roots with them and that forest grew 10 times faster during the long winter nights, it could flourish within weeks. The ink tree for Kata's bastion should grow faster as well, Ashlock mused. The only downside he could see was the deep slumber part. He was already a heavy sleeper, but if Stella raised enough of a ruckus, he would wake up despite his drowsiness. With the sign-in done, Ashlock quickly devoured the headless corpse. Plus 1,112 SC. To his surprise, there was a massive rush of chi as he felt his star core rapidly balloon in size. His trunk and canopy became aflame, and he felt waves of excitement through the root network as the mountain glowed with power. No way. That corpse was enough to push me over the edge. He brought up his status screen. Demonic Demi-Divine Tree, age, 9. Star Core, 8th stage. Soul type, Amethyst, Spatial. He had ascended to the 8th stage of the Star Core realm, only one more to go until he could start forming his nascent soul. Stella had already jumped up from the bench due to the sudden surge of power and was gazing up at his canopy in awe as a shower of purple motes drifted in the breeze like gentle snowfall, landing in her hair and the surrounding demonic trees. His ablaze canopy and trunk also lit up the night sky with lilac light. Stella, Ashlock said once the spectacle had calmed down and his star core had settled to its new size. Yes, Tree. Stella replied with stars in her eyes. I just got a new skill that lets me and my offspring grow 10 times as fast while sleeping, but it might put me into a deep slumber. Can you try and wake me up in a minute? Oh. That's awesome. Stella grinned, sure. I can try and wake you. Great, thanks. Ashlock replied and activated Nocturnal Genesis. Good night sleep overtook him instantly, like flicking a switch, and he was in dreamland. Wait. Since when could he dream? Chapter 227, Dreamscape. When Ashlock activated his new XKARNATION skill Nocturnal Genesis, his world changed. He was still stuck on a mountain peak as a tree, but that is where the similarities between his previous reality and this dreamscape he found himself in ended. The sparse cloud cover was gone and replaced with a sky full of stars that seemed to stretch on until infinity. However, this breathtaking sight was overshadowed by the 9 giant full moons looming overhead in a vertical line from the horizon to the zenith. They were scarily close, as if one could reach out and touch them. Ashlock noted that 8 of the 9 moons were dull in color, much like the Earth's moon, just 100 times the size. Ashlock felt a refreshing light on his leaves from these 8 dull moons that he assumed to be the lunar energy his new XKARNATION skill made him capable of absorbing to heal his soul. Looking within at his own soul, Ashlock noticed some hairline cracks slowly fading, which had likely been left from his usage of Progeny Dominion. He had assumed that the 1% damage to his soul caused by Tristan Evergreen many moons ago had been healed by absorbing the divine fragment, but he now noticed the lunar energies wrapping around his soul, and he could feel a part of him returning. Soul damage is scary, Ashlock muttered to himself. He hadn't even noticed that a part of his existence had been taken away until it started returning, almost like a distant memory of a summer-long past that he was only reminded of when shown a picture. Feeling relief at seeing his soul healing, Ashlock looked back outside his trunk at the dreamscape. A celestial wind that carried no scent or sound rustled his leaves, making him feel at peace. There was just one glaring thing off about this place that was bugging him. Why is one of the moons purple? The giant moon closest to the horizon had a distinct purple, almost lilac hue, eerily similar to the color of his soul fire, and the light it bathed him and carried traces of spatial chi. There was no chance one of the moons being the same color as his soul was a coincidence. If so, what did the 8 dull moons without a color represent? Ashlock thought for a while, but it was difficult to focus. Thinking in this place was hard, he felt half asleep. It was so relaxing under the moonlight that Ashlock wanted to stay here forever in slumber. If only the others could experience this. Ashlock slurred as he thought of how Stella and the others vanished when he activated the skill and was whisked away to this dreamscape. However, he wasn't totally alone here. Are you guys enjoying it? He asked his thousands of offspring, sprawling out like a scarlet sea in all directions. There wasn't much of a response apart from a wave of drowsiness. Ashlock's offspring were in a deep slumber under the 9 moons, and he decided to join them as his consciousness drifted off. Tree. Wake up. Ashlock awoke to shouts, sunlight, and the pitter-patter of rain hitting his leaves. Had the sparse clouds last night gathered into a storm? What? Ashlock grumbled as he slowly awoke from his dream. His body felt brand new, as if he had just left the spa, and he noticed that his star core had refilled far more than usual during the night. Tree, stop ignoring me. Stella's voice caught his attention. Looking down, he saw her standing under his canopy with her arms crossed below her chest and pouting. I know you are awake and can hear me. Good morning, Stella, Ashlock said through abyssal whispers. What's got you in such a bad mood this early? The sun has hardly risen. Is it the rain? A little water never hurt anyone. Water? Why would water hurt me? Stella laughed, and her foul mood left with the wind. I spent all night trying to wake you up like you asked me to, and after a night of ignoring me, you finally woke up and still ignored me. Oh. It all came rushing back. How his reality changed the moment he activated the skill. The 9 moons and how one provided him with spatial chi while the others remained dull, giving him lunar energies instead. It's morning. Idolatry daily sign-in system. Day, 3564. Daily credit, 1. Sacrifice credit, 1112. Sign in. Sure enough, his system confirmed that a night had indeed passed. Which was deeply concerning. It would appear the system hadn't lied about the deep slumber his Nocturnal Genesis would put him in. How hard did you try? Ashlock asked Stella. Mostly just shouting. Stella tapped her chin. Oh, I also took some fruit and jumped around on your branches, but nothing worked. When you activated that new technique, I felt your presence vanish. My presence vanished. What do you mean? It was as if your soul went somewhere else. Stella shrugged. Hard to describe, but you could have passed for a normal tree. Your offspring were much the same. They all went into a deep slumber, and I struggled to tell the difference between them and any other tree. Interesting. That hadn't been listed as one of the skill's features but was more like a happy coincidence. It was almost like a forest-wide stealth skill, letting Ashlock's offspring appear as nothing but typical trees during the night. Next time, try more forcefully to wake me up, Ashlock said. I don't mind if you pull off my leaves, break a branch or punch me. I need to know if it's possible to wake from the deep slumber the technique puts me in. Damn, okay, I didn't realize you wanted me to try quite that hard. Stella suddenly twirled in a flash of silver, a sword wreathed in purple flames appeared in her hand, and she took on a battle stance with her back to him. What is it, Stella? Ashlock asked with concern. Had a bounty hunter slipped past his perception? Stella squinted through the heavy downpour and let out a sigh of relief. Oh, it's just the others coming over, she said as the sword vanished. I could hear the faint sound of footsteps. I overreacted. Sorry. Ashlock followed her gaze and saw Diana walking casually through the storm. The rain swirled around her but never touched her clothes and hair, keeping her perfectly dry. Elaine and Douglas also took shelter from the rain in her little bubble, and Elaine gave Stella a wave. I will ensure my int secure the perimeter, so try to relax, Ashlock told Stella. He then instructed Chaos and Soul to guard the mountain peak. They had both been linked to him with a black root to recover their cultivation overnight after yesterday's battle. The narrative has been stolen. If detected on Amazon, report the infringement. The two ints unlinked and moved through the rain. Soul was like a lumbering lighthouse, while Chaos was a ghost as she shifted through the rain. Zeus and Titus remained down the mountain with Kaida to protect the collection of books and the midnight inkwing eggs. With Ashlock here, plus Larry crawling around in his canopy, Stella was heavily defended. Morning, Stella and Ashlock, Elaine called out. Stella returned a nod. Once they were under his vast canopy and safe from the rain, Diana dismissed her control of the surrounding water, letting it drop to the stone. I hope I'm not interrupting anything. Diana likely noticed how on edge Stella was as. She glanced between her and the demonic tree that towered over them. It was getting too complicated to cultivate while also keeping the cold water off me, and these two happened to tag along. What nonsense are you saying? Stella shook her head with a sigh. She sat down and patted the space beside her on the bench. You're always welcome. Come take a seat. Stella then gave an apologetic smile to Elaine and Douglas. Sorry, the bench can only sit two so. No worries, Douglas waved his hand, and the ground rumbled as brown soul flames fanned out from his feet. A moment later, two well-crafted stone thrones rose beside one another, and Douglas led Elaine to them while holding her hand. Stella blinked. Well, that works perfectly. I'm glad you approve, Douglas said as he sat. If I'm being a bother, just say so, and I'll go bunker down in the cavern. I just wanted a break from those darn mudcloaks, is all. Ashlock noted the gem-encrusted stone crown still atop Douglas's head as he slouched on his throne and propped his head up with his arm. Trust me, if you were being a bother, I would let you know, Stella smirked as she reached up and gave Mabel, who had just appeared on her head, a little head pat. A moment of silence passed between the four members of the Ashfolin sect as the downpour only worsened. When he had been a human, Ashlock hated nothing more than getting caught out in the rain, but now, as a tree, he welcomed the rain with open branches. He never felt parched since he could pump water through his roots from various rivers and lakes down on the ground, but the rain was akin to drinking an ice-cold glass of water rather than water from a bottle that had been sitting on a desk all day. It was fresh and hydrating. Stella. Elaine spoke up. Stella met Elaine's concerned gaze. What's up? How are you feeling with the bounty looming over your head? Elaine said with complete seriousness, my uncle once angered someone from the Tainted Cloud sect and found out he had a 2,500 Yingxi coin bounty on his head. He apparently stayed in our residence for decades, hoping they would forget about him, but there's a reason they are called the Eternal Pursuit Pavilion. They killed him. Stella's gaze was distant. Elaine nodded. While in our city, he never encountered a single one, but years later, the day he left into the wilderness with a group of youngsters to train and acquire beast cores, he was slaughtered by the day's end. Stella pursed her lips. This all happened before I was born, Elaine added, so I heard about it as a kid. It was one of the many stories the elders would tell us as an example of why we should always be humble and careful of who we offend. The image of Dante Void Mind flashed through Ashlock's mind, and he suspected those teachings had failed that man for one reason or another. Compared to Elaine, it was like night and day in personality. It was almost hard to believe they were siblings. Thank you for the warning, Stella said after a moment. I truly believe that so long as I stay near Ash, no harm will befall me, which is helping with my nerves. Or are you just putting on a strong front for the others? Ashlock mused after Stella's earlier display. Elaine sighed with relief. That's good. I would hate for you to be paranoid all the time, especially when this is likely a long-term problem that is difficult to resolve. Talking of bounty hunters, Diana interjected, didn't we have some spatial rings to crack open? That we do, Ashlock said to everyone present through abyssal whispers. Douglas winced, quickly taking a mind fortress fruit. Everyone else seemed able to tolerate his A- grade skill, which showed they were getting stronger mentally and in cultivation. Stella, bring out the rings, and I will break their seals. Stella retrieved Knox's rings from her pocket and threw them up into the air. Ashlock caught them with telekinesis. He then exerted his now 8th stage star core pressure onto the spatial ring seals. Since they belonged to Knox, who was at the peak of the 9th stage, even with the advantages of being a tree and having a large soul, it still took a few minutes. Having opened a fair few spatial rings in his life and studying them every time he encountered them, Ashlock knew spatial rings were attuned to a person's chi, allowing people to access a pocket dimension where their items were stored without needing spatial affinity. Being linked to someone's unique chi also acted as a protective mechanism to stop people from easily looting from someone's spatial ring simply by shaking hands. Even if the cultivator and the seal were weak, it would take a moment to break, and the seal being breached would be noticeable to the cultivator wearing the ring. While the multiple floating rings were wrapped in his soul fire, the seals all broke simultaneously. Ashlock didn't bother looking inside and simply pulled all the items from them and used telekinesis so nothing broke by hitting the floor. Wow. Douglas said as he leaned forward with interest. A sizable pile of items was now between the 2 stone thrones and the bench. The majority were clothes that belonged to Knox. Stella fished out her other maple leaf earring straight away and briefly hugged it before having Diana help her put it back in her ear. After confirming that her eldritch gaze still worked, she sighed in relief. We got it back, tree. Indeed we did, Ashlock replied. Although it was you who managed to chop her hand off, so it was your own hard work that got it back. Stella nodded, returned to the pile, pulled out a dress, and laughed as she held it up against herself. Is Knox really a woman? These would be a better fit for you, Douglas. Douglas glanced up from fishing through the spatial stones and heaps of dragon and golden crowns and scowls. Don't get any funny ideas. There's no way I'm trying any of this shit on for your amusement. Stella shrugged as she threw the dress aside. Me neither. Even if it fits, there's no way I'm stealing that woman's style. In truth, Ashlock could see that the dress was only a size or 2 up from Stella and would definitely not fit Douglas's large frame. But it did confirm that Knox was taller than Stella, who was already on the taller side for a girl. Other than the heaps of clothes, there was a fair amount of spirit stones and mortal currency, which would be very helpful for creating runic formations on the bastions. But there weren't a lot of artifacts, which made sense when Ashlock thought about it. Why would Knox keep any artifacts in her spatial ring? She would either be wearing them or, as a merchant, would have sold them off. Oh hey, it's one of those masks. Stella picked up a jade mask from between 2 heaps of clothes that was exactly the same as the ones the bounty hunters had worn, capable of masking a person's voice and blocking attacks to the mind and senses. Stella put the jade mask on and found it stayed on her face without straps. Whoa, it feels totally weightless, and I can see everything better than before. She said with a distorted voice. Hey, anyone know what this is? Elaine asked while holding a gold and black pendant. Everyone looked over and shook their heads. Elaine flipped it over, and her eyes widened as she read something on its back. This must be the thing Knox used to place the bounty on Stella. How can you tell? Stella asked after taking off her mask. Look for yourself, Elaine said, holding up the pendant. Stella used telekinesis to take the pendant out of Elaine's hand and drift it over so she could also take a look. Ashlock looked over Stella's shoulder, and sure enough, a bounty was written in spiritual text on the pendant's surface. Death of Stella Crestfallen. Target's estimated threat level, Star Core 1 unverified. Affiliation with Ashfallen Trading Company. Star Core 9 unverified. Bounty, 6,000 Yingxi coins. Double if completed by sundown, failed. The bounty is placed by Knox Duskwalker, and the target is at the marked location. For more information, consult a Lotus informant. A bounty for my death. Stella murmured as she stared at the pendant in her palm with a distant look. Wait, only 6,000 Yingxi coins. And they list my star core at the first stage. Well, that is good, Ashlock said. The fact they underestimate you and the bounty has halved since the night has passed should be good news. So why do you look annoyed? Stella sighed. We aren't going to catch the big fish if they think I am weak and cheap. She handed Diana the pendant and jade mask. You should go and be a bounty hunter and raise my bounty. At least set it back to 12,000. Diana looked at her blankly. You're just annoyed because you thought the bounty was 12,000 when it's really only 6,000, which, may I remind you, is still 2 to 3 times higher than a normal one. You should be happy it's lower, not peeved. Diana handed the 2 artifacts back. Ashlock could only laugh. Stella, if we are done searching through this batch, give me the spatial rings of the 2 bounty hunters we killed. Let's see if they have anything interesting. Chapter 228, Artifacts. Ashlock easily broke the seals on the many rings looted from the 2 slain bounty hunters, confirming his suspicion that both men had been a stage or 2 below Knox. Once again, he let the contents from the ring rain down and form a separate pile beside Knox's belongings. Oddly, all that went through Ashlock's mind as he saw the piles of shiny coins nestled among bundles of clothes was that this felt like Christmas and that he was turning into a dragon with a horde. Oh, this is a much better selection than Knox's, Stella said as she crouched beside the items and began digging through them. She then paused and muttered, I'm an idiot. Standing up, her hands wreathed in spatial soul flames. With a simple gesture, the items all rose up with telekinesis, allowing her to have them float around so she could inspect them in 3 dimensions. Did you get this idea from Knox? Diana asked as she wandered around inspecting the goods. Much like Knox's pile, most of the items were personal things like clothes, but there was also a fair amount of spirit stones and mortal currency. However, even more exciting was the presence of artifacts. Yeah, as much as I hate Knox, she knew how to present her artifacts for sale. Stella seemed drawn to a ring encrusted with an amethyst gemstone. After a brief inspection, she slid it on her finger, but it didn't seem to fit her slender fingers and sat too loosely. What's that, Stella? Ashlock asked. His system could not tell him the grade or function of artifacts not given to him by the system since he lacked an appraisal skill. Stella shrugged, no idea, but I felt a faint trace of the spatial chi coming from the gemstone, so I think it's an artifact that helps with something spatial affinity related. Why don't you test it over there? Diana gestured to near the edge of Ashlock's canopy, where the rain had gotten even more intense. Stella took the artifact and walked over to the area Diana had pointed to. Everyone watched in anticipation as she pushed her chi into the ring, and the amethyst gemstone lit up with a purple hue, which then spread to her finger. Ah! I think I know what this does now, Stella said after a while as she turned to face everyone. She then gestured to the items still floating, and with a flick of her finger, they all began to spin faster. It seems to be an artifact that gives minor control over telekinesis. Stella lowered her hand and stopped injecting chi into the artifact, but it's too weak to help me much. That's a shame, Ashlock said, wondering what grade the system would assign such an artifact. Perhaps C grade. If all it offers is increased control over telekinesis, it's not very versatile. Something like increased control over all spatial techniques would be better. Stella wandered back over, and to Ashlock's surprise, she strode up to Douglas and deposited the ring in his hand. The ring converts any chi type into spatial chi through the gemstone, and the inside of the ring has runic lines that handle the telekinesis technique. I do not need it as it only worsens my control, but I think it would suit you. Oh really? Douglas took the artifact with surprise on his face. You are giving this to me? Stella crocked a brow. Yeah. Why wouldn't I? It's just you're not one to usually give gifts. Douglas muttered. Stella tilted her head. What else am I supposed to do with it? It's practically trash to me. I can't even wear it to look nice because it's too big for my finger. Besides, Earth affinity is usually rather grounded, so wouldn't telekinesis be a massive boon for you? Douglas gave a strained smile after learning the truth behind Stella's charitable actions. That's true. I can think of several uses for this artifact. Douglas slid on the ring, and it fit perfectly. Now, what do I do? Should I just push my earth chi into the gemstone? Stella nodded. Yeah, it's really that simple. Even a dumbass like you can operate it. Alright, here goes nothing. Douglas grumbled at Stella's comments. Don't laugh at me, okay? Earth soul flames ran down his arm from his soul and into the gemstone. Sure enough, it began to glow with a purple hue, and Douglas's eyes widened. It really worked. Did you think I would lie or something? Stella clicked her tongue. Douglas decided not to answer that question and took out his walking stick from his spatial ring and propped it up against the stone throne. Taking a few steps back, he pointed his glowing finger with the ring on it at the walking stick, and after struggling for a while to get a handle of the ring's power, the walking stick began to shudder and slowly lifted into the air. Elaine clapped. Well done. You finally did it. Douglas turned to Elaine, and his eye twitched. I appreciate the applause, but it was supposed to be something easy to do. Oh, Elaine lowered her hands. Sorry. Douglas sighed as the walking stick floated over into his hand, and now I feel bad. Sorry. Elaine said again, clearly confused about what to do. Douglas embraced her in a short hug and didn't say anything more. Stella looked between the two in confusion. Then, with a shrug, she seemed to give up on understanding the situation and returned to the floating items. Like a composer with telekinesis, Stella separated the clothes, spirit stones, and mortal currency into distinct piles, leaving only a few artifacts floating. Unauthorized use of content. If you find this story on Amazon, report the violation. These are all the artifacts. Diana asked as she grabbed two black military-style boots with blue laces. Mind if I take these? They suit my style, and I've been looking for new shoes. Stella shrugged. Sure. I don't like wearing shoes anyway. Which was true. She was barefoot most of the time. But so were a lot of cultivators. Their bodies were superhuman, so they could walk over jagged rocks without care, and shoes that weren't artifact gear would be destroyed quickly in a fight. Thanks. Diana sat on the bench and put them on. Standing back up, she got a feel for them by walking around in a circle. They feel good. What do they do though? Stella asked. Diana pushed Chi into the boots, and they took on an ethereal look as if they would fade away in the wind. Strange, they look ghostly but feel as solid as before, Diana muttered as she stepped forward, her whole body blurred as she crossed more distance than expected. Whoa, what was that? Stella took a step back as if worried she would get knocked over by being in Diana's path. Meanwhile, Diana stood rooted in place like a terrified snowboarder with both arms spread out and crouched slightly. I have no idea, Diana admitted. It felt like something forcefully pushed my body forward faster than I've ever experienced. The capabilities of the boots were yet to be fully discerned, but Ashlock had already deemed them far more useful than the ring Douglas had been given. That blur effect alone would set these boots as a B-grade artifact, and I must admit they suit Diana's style. Why don't you try going for a run in them? Stella suggested. Diana scowled at her. Are you trying to kill me? I am scared of taking a single step right now, let alone walking or running. Stop being dramatic. What's the worst that could happen? Stella nonchalantly replied. You go flying, faceplant the ground, and soul heals any injury you sustain. Did you forget you are a demon that got beaten up so hard you formed a crater in the stone and yet still live? Fair point. Diana manifested her raven wings and crouched in a sprinting position with her wings close to her back. Although soul could heal most injuries, Ashlock was still unsure if this was a great idea. But Stella was right. Diana was a star core cultivator with a demon body, so she would have to throw herself from space to have a chance of serious injury. Alright, here goes nothing, and if anything bad happens, it's your fault, Stella. Diana sprinted forward. Once again, the ethereal boots seemed to extend their ghostly form to her whole body, making her blur as she ran. Her speed was also faster than Ashlock had ever seen the demoness manage before as she reached the edge of the mountain peak within 2 seconds and then threw herself off the side and into a glide through the rain by spreading out her majestic raven wings. Stella whistled in amazement. That was quite some speed, and I struggled to keep track of her movement. She nodded to herself. Those do indeed suit Diana with that effect since she prefers to get up close and personal when fighting, so the extra speed and confusion that effect gives is perfect. What do you think, Tree? I agree. Those boots are a perfect fit for Diana's fighting style. Ashlock said. But they would also be useful for almost anyone here. Best she has them. Stella disagreed with his suggestion. Especially if she is to become a bounty hunter, these will help her escape pursuers. A moment later, Diana returned. soaring through the rain and crash-landing headfirst into the stone under Ashlock's canopy. Groaning, she hesitantly got to her feet and stopped pushing chi into the boots, causing them to return to normal. These are going to take some getting used to. How much do they increase your speed? Ashlock asked. Diana tapped her chin. I think they doubled my speed while running but didn't help much while I was flying other than making my body blur. Seems like a good find and perfect for you then. Ashlock then focused on Stella. Found anything, Stella? And what about Elaine? Have you found any artifacts that interest you? Elaine was sitting on one of the stone thrones with a few artifacts on her lap, and she had been intently studying their runic patterns. Oh, my apologies, Ashlock. I was distracted. I've been looking for a defensive artifact, but there seemed to be none so far. Ashlock found that strange, but then he thought some more. A cultivator would always wear defensive artifacts as they served no purpose sitting inside their spatial rings. As merchants, they should have had at least one defensive artifact between the three of them. Ashlock then thought back to how the two bounty hunters had been devoured. One by the void, and the other by his black vines. Not even a shred of cloth had remained. I must have eaten them, Ashlock grumbled at the realization. His vines, and especially the void, did not discriminate and would devour anything they could get their tendrils on. But Stella had thoroughly checked and looted one of the corpses. So maybe they didn't have any defensive artifacts after all. Although I did find this. Elaine held up a silver bracelet covered in runic lines. When I wore it and injected my chi, I felt my field of perception sharpen. Its effects sounded relatively weak compared to the boots Diana had picked out. Still, a greater ability to track threats around her in a fight would help Elaine tremendously, especially with her lesser battle experience than the others here. That suits you well. You should take it. Ashlock said, and Elaine gave him a thankful nod while holding the bracelet close to her chest. Now, all that was left was for Stella to pick something. There were still around a dozen artifacts to choose from, ranging from jewelry like rings and necklaces to more odd items like a small wooden statue of a three-headed dog. The problem was not all artifacts could just be worn and used. Some were specific for certain affinities, while others were too weak or powerful to be used. Stella spent a while trying on various jewelry pieces but didn't seem to be a fan of them. Either because they didn't fit, their effects were a mismatch to her skill set, or like the ring she gave to Douglas, they were too weak. She was a rather strong cultivator now firmly in the Star Core realm, so artifacts matching her caliber will be increasingly rare. While watching her shift through the items with Elaine at her side and giving suggestions, Ashlock felt a ringing at the back of his mind. Focusing on it, he felt concern coming from chaos through their mental link. Someone was coming. Ashlock used Eye of the Tree God to peer through the torrential rainstorm and saw Sebastian Silverspire flying through the sky on an ornate sword with Riker standing behind him and peering past his waist at Red Vine Peak. It was finally time for the Silverspires to set foot on Red Vine Peak. Sebastian will be here in a moment, Ashlock told the group. I don't want them to become totally aware of what I am and what is happening here as they haven't sworn an oath of loyalty. But we have things to discuss with them, and keeping them at arm's length for so long when they are business partners feels wrong. The Silverspires have, without a doubt, been our greatest allies so far. Other than the Redclaws, of course. Who should lead the discussion, and what points do you want to cover? Diana asked. You and Stella can make the initial introduction and then give them a Mind Fortress pill. Since Sebastian Silverspire is a Star Core cultivator trusted to guard one of their Grand Elder's children, he should be mentally strong enough to speak with me directly. As you wish, Diana patted Stella's shoulder. Let's go greet them. Sebastian's shadow grew progressively larger through the rain until he touched down at the edge of Ashlock's canopy. Withdrawing his sword, he led Riker toward the waiting Stella and Diana by putting a hand on the young boy's back. We have come as requested. Sebastian Silverspire bowed his head, and water dripped from his long silver hair onto the floor, to meet with the immortal leader of the Ashfolin Trading Company. Chapter 229, Immortal Tree. Sebastian Silverspire saw Red Vine Peak in the distance through the pouring rain. Due to the weather and dense cloud coverage overhead, Red Vine Peak was naturally obscured in the darkness of the raging storm. However, the mountain peak was shrouded in mystery, even on a day of sunshine and endless blue skies. Surrounding the perimeter of the peak was a sparse wall of demonic trees with only their canopies visible. Everything else, including their black trunks, was concealed within a constant swirling chi-dense mist. As he got closer, passing over the many groves that littered the mountain range, he saw the giant demonic tree looming in the distance. The mist only managed to hide around half of the tree's gargantuan size as it lorded over the surroundings. Regardless, Sebastian knew what he saw wasn't the truth. A strange dome of spatial chi encompassed the mountain peak, concealing everything occurring around the tree from spiritual sight. Flying closer, he slowed his speed and approached cautiously. Even though he had been invited here by the leader of the Ashlock Trading Company, he was still apprehensive. They might have signed a contract of cooperation, but such a contract would be easily voided if they were both to die here. Of course, our maids would figure out our demise by the day's end and report it back to the family. But I'm unsure if the Silver Spire family could win against the Ashlock Trading Company with the Grand Elder in closed-door cultivation. Sebastian tightened his grip on the pommel of his sword. I hope we haven't angered them, and I won't need to lay down my life on this miserably great day for Riker to escape. Having slowed to a crawl to show no disrespect, Sebastian passed over the vast mist wall surrounding the mountain peak, and out of the corner of his eye, he saw something shifting through the trees below. Trying to feel out what was watching him with spiritual sight returned nothing, not even the faintest trace of chi, which could only mean one thing. Someone with void affinity was watching him. Is this where the big sisters live? Riker asked from behind, and Sebastian almost jumped in his own skin. I need to get a grip. I'm far too nervous for a seasoned bodyguard of the young master. Yes, Riker. We were invited to come talk to their leader today. Sebastian ran a hand through his soaked hair. It was far from ideal weather for their first meeting. He could have mobilized his metal chi to form a dome around them, but that might have been seen as an attack, so it was best to suck it up. Hell, if they showed up looking like drowned rats, maybe the mighty Ashlock Trading Company would take pity on them. Having passed over the mist wall and having entered the dome of spatial chi, Sebastian could finally get a good look at Red Vine Peak with his own eyes without everything being distorted from afar. The place was bare, to say the least. There was nothing here besides the demonic trees and a giant hole toward the western side of the mountain peak. No palace, servant quarters, libraries, airship docks, workers. Basically, anything he expected to be found on the grounds of a powerful pill-producing sect. There was an alchemy cavern, so maybe the rest is down there. Sebastian spread his spiritual sense just a little into the hole and was confused by what he felt. First, the hole seemed to go down endlessly through the mountain, and second, he felt the presence of many monsters. What in the Nine Realms is happening down there? Is that a monster farm? Reeling in his spiritual sight before he went too far and got caught snooping around, he felt the presence of cultivators. Glancing to the side, he saw two women standing under the canopy of the giant demonic tree. Big sisters. Riker called out while pointing down at the two. Yes, it seems they have come to guide us, Sebastian replied, directing his sword into a calm descent. Not too fast to seem threatening and not too slow to seem like he was wasting their time. It was all about decorum with these people. Finally touching down beside the two, he retracted his sword and Riker hopped off. We have come as requested, Sebastian Silverspire said as clearly as he could, then bowed his head. He also put his hand on the back of Riker's head and made him bow alongside him. To meet with the immortal leader of the Ashlock Trading Company. Sebastian was unsure how to properly refer to their leader, but he had often heard the Redclaws throwing around the term immortal, so he went with that. Studying the two women's surprisingly unobscured faces, they didn't seem to react much to his words. Big Sister Stella isn't wearing a mask, Riker said, making Sebastian curse inwardly. The young master wasn't yet old enough to have had the proper way of speaking to adults drilled into his head. Stella gave Riker a thin smile. We are working together, and you have been a big help to us. There's no reason to hide as much anymore. Riker nodded his little head and then looked to the other woman present. Excuse me, miss, you seem familiar yet different. Are you also a big sister? Who taught you to speak so politely? The beautiful black-haired woman crouched to his height and grinned, showing two fangs. My name is Diana. We have met before. Do you not remember me? A flash of realization appeared on Riker's face, and he nodded furiously. Of course I remember Big Sister Diana. But why do you look so different? That was a question Sebastian had, too. Not only had her appearance changed, but her cultivation had also skyrocketed. She appeared friendly, but Sebastian felt on edge. There was something off about this woman, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Wait, fangs. Why does she have fangs? That's because a demoness never shows her true side. Diana laughed and ruffled Riker's hair. You're a demoness. Riker tilted his head in confusion. I thought demons were scary with horns and wings. At least that's what Mother told me. I have never seen one myself. What about these? Diana asked as giant raven wings manifested from her back and expanded out, encompassing them all within their vast wingspan. Do these wings scare you? Sebastian hid his surprise as best he could. Demons were a rare type of cultivator capable of cultivating demonic chi found in beast cores. They often had non-human features due to the demonic chi mutating their bodies, which made them stand out. But Diana had managed to hide in plain sight and come off as normal at a casual glance. It wasn't until he got close that something felt off about her, and then her smile had exposed those fangs. Riker reached out and touched the wing's feathers with a look of apprehension. When nothing terrible happened upon touching them, he seemed in awe. They are so soft. I'm glad you like them. Diana retracted the giant wings and stood back up. See, not all demons are scary, although you should probably avoid most of us. Now, let's get you two cleaned up. She opened her palm, and Sebastian felt a pulling force on him. The story has been taken without consent. If you see it on Amazon, report the incident. What the? Oh. Sebastian felt all the water, drenching his white robes and silver hair being pulled away in a mist and then condensing into a swirling ball above Diana's palm. We can't have our guests that braved the rain be drenched and miserable, Diana said as she let the water ball fall to the floor. Stella coughed to draw their attention. Ahem, let us discuss more away from the freezing rain, shall we? The well-regarded princess of the Ashfolin sect turned to leave toward a group of stone thrones and a bench that looked comically small compared to the vast demonic tree that soared up into the sky and cast a looming shadow with its sprawling canopy. Sebastian and Riker exchanged a glance. Please follow me, Stella called out, and Sebastian didn't hesitate for a moment longer. As he fell in a step behind the two women, he couldn't help but look up. Hundreds, if not thousands, of different colored fruits grew in clusters from the many branches of the demonic tree. He would need to jump up quite far to grab any of them, even from the lowest hanging branches. Is that the spirit beast? Sebastian wondered as he saw a large shadow crawling between the branches. His attention was diverted from the nightmare crawling overhead to the stone thrones. The ground was rumbling as two more rose from the ground, one smaller than the other. You will need this. Stella placed a porcelain pill bottle in his hand. This is. Sebastian raised a brow. It's a mind fortress pill. Most need to eat one to handle the immortal's words. Stella tried to explain, but it only made Sebastian even more confused. Why would he need such a pill to handle someone's voice? Stella studied his expression briefly and smiled. It's fine if you don't understand. You can always take the pill after experiencing his words first. Anyway, come take a seat. I was just trying to pick an artifact from these options. Perhaps you can help me. I'm not a professionally trained artifact appraiser, but I could make some solid guesses as to their functions and if they will benefit you, Sebastian replied smoothly as he pocketed the pill bottle in his robes. But then his eyes widened as he stood beside the stone throne raised for him and saw the piles of items haphazardly laid out on the floor. Whoa, so much stuff. Riker had stars in his eyes. Where did you get so many things? Some foolish bounty hunters came after me, so we slaughtered them and looted their corpses, Stella replied casually as she took her seat on the bench and crossed her legs. This is the result of stealing the wealth of 3 peak star core cultivators. Sebastian felt his mind slow to a halt. There was just so much to unpack from a statement said so casually. But he ignored it for his sanity and decided to take the seat offered to him beside a large man wearing a beige suit and a crude stone crown encrusted with gems on his head. Stella flicked her finger, and a dozen items that he soon realized were the artifacts she had been speaking of earlier began to orbit around him. Which of these would suit me as a mid-stage star core spatial cultivator? Since when was she a mid-stage? Sebastian didn't dare question her words, but the last time he saw her fight, she was near the bottom of the star core stages regarding chi output. Let me see. Sebastian inspected each artifact one by one. He was no expert, so there was a lot of guesswork involved. I just need to find something made from high-quality materials with a practical purpose. Sebastian picked out a pair of gloves but found they were inlaid with a material best suited for ice cultivators. A few more artifacts were inspected, but Sebastian could still not find anything, as the rest of the items were of poor quality and would be useless in star core level combat. What about this? Riker was standing on the stone throne beside him and had grabbed what looked like a mirror. Sebastian had overlooked that one, but now that Riker held it up, he could see an intricate runic array on its back. Could this be a technique reflection artifact? Or one that can zoom in on pimples? There's no way to know. The mirror floated away from Riker's grasp and toward Stella. Grabbing it, she inspected the back of it for a while, then grinned. "Oh, this is perfect. Great choice, Riker." Sebastian felt like he had failed an assessment somehow. With a sigh of defeat, he diverted his gaze past the artifacts orbiting him to the piles of spirit stones and mortal currency. His curiosity got the better of him. "What are you planning to do with all this stuff? I know some good appraisers that can sell the artifacts for you." The moment those words left his mouth, he felt an immense pressure on his consciousness. He tried to resist, but it was futile. Was he under attack? Had he misspoke? "We will be giving you some as compensation." 1,000 voices echoed within his mind simultaneously, seemingly coming from all directions. Sebastian felt his breath quicken, and his ears began to ring. A white fog that hadn't been there before started to close in, and within this approaching fog, he could see shadows lurking. Sebastian took a step back and despised how his hands were shaking. What is happening? From your reaction, I assume you hear the Immortal's voice." Stella smiled lightly as she slouched on the bench, her head propped up with her arm. Nobody else seemed to be reacting to the white fog or 1,000 voices. So, was it all happening inside his head? A sudden black tree began to take root and bloom within his consciousness, and then the voices spoke again. "There is no shame in taking the pill. Those with untempered minds will struggle to listen to my words." Sebastian gritted his teeth as he reached into his robe's folds and retrieved the pill bottle he had pocketed only a moment earlier. Popping the cork with one finger, he extracted 3 pills and ate them all at once. To hell with his pride. Every word from this immortal shook his consciousness to its very core and twisted his reality. The moment the pills dissolved, he felt a calming breeze pass through his mind that pushed back the white fog to the farthest reaches of his consciousness, and the black tree stopped growing and began to wither away until it finally turned to dust. "It would appear my puny mind is not conditioned enough to receive your words." Sebastian was about to bow but then realized he didn't know where the Immortal was. "May I know where the Immortal is speaking to me from? I cultivate within the mountain and leave this demonic tree to guard my daughter Stella and use it as a proxy for my powers and to speak with you. Therefore, you can consider this tree as an extension of myself." Sebastian nodded toward the giant tree. "I see. Thank you for allowing Riker and me to come here." "Why are you talking to the tree, Sebastian?" Riker asked, and Sebastian realized how weird the situation must look to everyone, with him standing and speaking one-sidedly to a tree. Sebastian looked down at Riker with a strained smile tugging at the edge of his lips and resisted the urge to ruffle the kid's hair as he knew the young master hated it. "The Immortal of the Ashlock sect is using the tree to speak to me in my mind." "Oh, I see," Riker nodded. "What did the Immortal want us for?" "I asked you to come here so we could compensate you from our earnings as these cultivators died due to a long string of events you were involved in. And I wanted to ask about the Eternal Pursuit Pavilion." Sebastian relayed the answer to Riker and then replied to the Immortal. "The compensation is greatly appreciated for Riker's sake. His brothers and sisters have been rather successful in their cities, so we are playing catch-up, and we never know when the Grand Elder might step out of closed-door cultivation and declare the end of the competition. That aside, what did you wish to know about the Eternal Pursuit Pavilion?" "Apparently, the Silver Spire family still has ties to the bounty hunters. Is this true?" Sebastian looked between everyone present. They trusted him enough to show their faces, and they seemed to already know about the Silver Spire's relationship with the Banished Pavilion, so he hesitantly nodded. "It's true. We were thinking of letting one of our own join the Eternal Pursuit Pavilion to use it as a place to sell our pills. Would the Grand Elder consider Yingxi coins as wealth for the Silver Core competition?" Sebastian nodded again. "Yingxi coins are the most valuable currency in the wilderness. It's only here in the Blood Lotus sect where they hold less weight due to the actions of the Patriarch many years ago. Why doesn't the Immortal know this? Is he not from this realm?" Sebastian wondered. The Eternal Pursuit Pavilion was widespread throughout the wilderness, and anyone who had lived a long life would have encountered them. "Perfect. Would you happen to know a way we could join? If possible, we don't want to travel all the way to the Tainted Cloud sect for registration." "That can be arranged. We have a direct contact." Sebastian sighed. "It's a bit risky as Riker doesn't know this contact, and this might be me overstepping my bounds as his guard, but if we don't do something, Riker is going to lose. Then we have a deal. Diana will be joining the Eternal Pursuit Pavilion." Chapter 230, Interlude, Return to Duskwalker. Knox marveled at her freshly healed hand, twisting, turning, and flexing it under the room's dim lighting. The phantom pain of a missing hand that had haunted her for the last week was finally gone. Now, all she missed was the cold feeling of silver on her fingers. They looked and felt naked without her many spatial rings. Is your new hand functioning as intended? Try and run some chi through it. The slender white-robed light affinity cultivator she had hired seemed incredibly nervous, and for good reason. When she had hired him a few days ago, she hadn't disclosed that she was one of the most infamous and hated people in the Tainted Cloud sect and a scion of the affluent and influential Duskwalker family. Knox did as the healer instructed. Her hand, now devoid of any calluses from years of training, became wreathed in black soul flames. It's perfect. You did a great job, Helion. I am glad the mistress is pleased, the man said, wiping his brow with his sleeve and then giving an awkward smile. Now about payment. To reform your entire hand from scratch took a month's worth of chi from me, so I was hoping. Knox raised her new hand to silence the man. I have no money. Excuse me. The man questioned. His voice turned a tad cold. My services are not free, even for a person of your status, Knox Duskwalker. I demand some kind of compensation. Sorry, Helion, Knox said, showing her hands without any spatial rings. I truly have nothing to give you. I lost everything I owned along with my hand to a brat. The one with the bounty on her head. Helion asked. Knox nodded. Chase her for payment, and you would even get 6,000 Yinxi coins for your troubles. Not a bad deal, right? The light cultivator scowled at her and seemed about to hurl some insults when the door to Knox's bedroom slammed open, and a woman with similar features to her stormed in without even knocking. It was Evelyn, her sister. Knox, are you healed yet? I find it impossible to cultivate with your presence in my house. The woman stood at the end of the room, glaring at her with understandable hatred. You have overstayed your welcome. I want you gone. You hear me? Are you listening? Sister, I am all healed thanks to Helion's efforts, Knox said, showing off her freshly healed hand. There is just a slight problem. She trailed off at the end and tried to divert her gaze. Her sister crocked a brow, and what might that be? Irritation and impatience dripped from every word, and she was tapping her foot. Which was never a good sign of her mood. I have no way to pay him. Knox said flatly, is there any chance you could handle the payment? I can pay you back. Haunted laughter from her sister filled the room. Pay me back. Evelyn sneered, do you know how little your word holds to me, Knox? You promised father you would cut ties with the celestial warden of the Eternal Pursuit Pavilion and proceed with the engagement with the Lunar Shade family, only to destroy our family with your selfishness and run out into the wilderness as a merchant and never look back. Sister, don't you dare call me that, Evelyn cursed with enraged breaths. I can't believe you have the audacity to ask me for money. Do you know what happened when you left without a word? In your place, I was given to the Lunar Shade family scion for the last 500 years to appease their rage, used as nothing but a plaything and source of scorn while being endlessly compared to you. Knox's eyes widened. Was that father's idea? Father is dead, has been for a century now. He was killed once the Grand Elder of the Lunar Shade family reached the 6th stage of the nascent soul realm and ambushed him alongside many bounty hunters. Knox pursed her lips. What was she supposed to say? It was her father who had forced the engagement between herself and someone she hated, so were they really so surprised she ran away? But to think my sister took my place as that bastard's plaything. Knox clenched her teeth, but she could do nothing in her current state. The Lunar Shade family was the strongest in the Tainted Cloud sect, behind only the celestial warden of the Eternal Pursuit Pavilion. Maybe I should pay him a visit. My cousin did mention he was out of closed-door cultivation. So it's just you, mother, and our cousins left to run the family? Knox asked her sister, who had calmed down only slightly while trying to ignore Helion, who had retreated into the corner of the room. Evelyn shook her head. We absorbed some smaller families to bolster our numbers, but things are looking bad for us. If not for my sacrifice to the Lunar Shade scion, I fear you wouldn't have a family left to beg for money. Speaking of, one of our stupid cousins saw a bounty placed in your name and went to check on you. Did you happen to meet him? Briefly. Why? It's just strange. A week has passed since cousin left, and we haven't heard from him since. The woman crossed her arms and frowned. He was our best up-and-coming talent, and we hoped he would step into the nascent soul realm within the next century. That fool is most likely dead after trying to kill Stella. Knox cursed to herself. It wasn't her fault a stupid cousin went after an unverified bounty. Her plan had been to attract some other fools to use as distractions so she could escape. Not her own cousin. Sorry to interrupt, but I have an appointment at the pavilion this afternoon, Helion spoke up, drawing a scornful gaze from Evelyn. Then leave. There's nothing left for you here in the Duskwalker residence. Evelyn's hatred for light cultivators as a shadow affinity herself was obvious from her vindictive tone. And you? Evelyn glared at Knox. I want you gone. You aren't welcome here any longer. With that, she left, slamming the door as she went. The moment I found out you were a Duskwalker, I should have never accepted this request, Helion grumbled. You shadow cultivators are all the same. Knox's gaze lingered on the slammed door for a moment. Her heart had long gone cold, but hearing such words from her sister still stung more than she cared to admit. With a sigh, she got up from the edge of her bed. Helion, let's go to the pavilion together. And why the hell would I want to be seen traveling with you? Helion snapped. I still have some Yinxi coins in my account. Didn't you want payment? Why in the Nine Realms didn't you say that earlier? Let's go. The Tainted Cloud sect comprised 5 major cities, each had a branch of the Eternal Pursuit Pavilion. However, one stood out compared to the other branches as it was overseen by the Celestial Warden, and it just so happened to be the nearest one to the Duskwalker residence. Knox and Helion flew side by side through the night toward the pavilion that dominated a small mountain in the city center. The journey from the Duskwalker residence had taken an hour, and neither had said a word during the flight. The pair touched down in a bustling courtyard with men and women wrapped in black robes shuffling between the many ornate buildings crafted from jade. Knox felt an overwhelming sense of nostalgia. It was here where she had made a name for herself, attracted the attention of the Celestial Warden who ruled the pavilion, and everything had gone wrong. The story has been taken without consent. If you see it on Amazon, report the incident. Keep your head low, Helion whispered over the noise of people as his sword vanished in a flash of silver. Anyone capable of defeating you knows your bounty is a farce, but some hot-headed youths don't respect the rules and might cause trouble. Knox clicked her tongue as she pulled up the hood of her cloak. Fine. Come with me, I will take you to the Jade Sentinel's building. We will get better service there and can avoid any problems. Helion nodded and followed close behind as Knox led him through the winding streets. The Eternal Pursuit Pavilion was more like a town, with hundreds of buildings dedicated to various operations. All the buildings around here were used by the Iron Seekers, also known as Junior Hunters. They were typically members of the pavilion in the Soulfire realm and were given the more common missions, such as gathering monster materials and flora for pills and weapons. The Eternal Pursuit Pavilion may have initially made a name for itself as an elite group of bounty hunters. However, over time, the pavilion expanded its operations to become a one-stop shop where someone could hire others to complete any desired task. The numerous Iron Seekers in the pavilion were enough for most tasks to get the job done. But they would need to request the next rank up for something a little riskier. Identify yourself. A guard at the gate to the Crimson Trackers area drew his sword. Knox was about to step up, but Helion acted first. Flashing his pendant for the guard to see. Helion, Lightbringer of the Crimson Trackers, and this is my guest. The guard compared the pendant to a jade tablet in his hand. Eventually, he lowered his sword and nodded them through. Apologies for holding you up, Master Helion. Please come right through. With a nod, Helion took back his pendant and led the way. The buildings became more sparse yet grand in size. The streets were also notably less crowded, and Knox could feel the subtle pressure from everyone's star cores as they walked past. Helion, how long did it take you to graduate from an Iron Seeker into a Crimson Tracker? Knox asked to fill the awkward silence between them. I was already in the Star Core realm when I joined, but it took me a few years to complete the 10 missions required to graduate to the Crimson Trackers. Helion said, the competition was fierce. Same as in the past, then, Knox mumbled. It was a testament to how set in their ways the pavilion was, considering nothing had changed in 500 years. They continued walking for a while and eventually came across a heavily guarded area before a grand gate made entirely from pale green jade. Engraved into the archway were the words Jade Sentinels, the highest rank within the Eternal Pursuit Pavilion, under the Celestial Warden. They were the elites that mostly took on high-paying bounty hunter missions. It was also the rank Knox had climbed to all those years ago. Compared to the Crimson Trackers gate guards, These guards didn't dare make a scene by drawing their swords, as anyone brave enough to approach the Jade Sentinel's area likely belonged beyond the archway. "Greetings, may I know your esteemed names?" the guard said respectfully. He was a large man wreathed in subtle brown flames, showing he cultivated earth affinity. Taking off her hood and flashing a smile, Knox humored the man's request. "Knox Duskwalker, eternal member of the Jade Sentinels." "Oh, it's you. I could never forget such a face." The guard frowned but stepped aside, granting them entry to the inner sanctum of the Eternal Pursuit Pavilion, where only the high-ranking hunters of the Jade Sentinels were allowed. However, the guest may only remain inside for 1 day. If I catch him inside a minute longer, he will be stripped of his rank and banished from the pavilion. Do I make myself clear? You will do no such thing. Knox flexed her star core, making the guard grit his teeth. "Come on, Helion, ignore this crimson tracker with a loud mouth." As the authority of the Jade Sentinels whittled away over the last few centuries to the point a mere guard can make demands of me. In the past, they would drop to one knee at the mention of my name. Passing through the archway and feeling the pressure of the defensive arrays pass over her, Knox beelined for the nearest Lotus informant hole. The area given to the Jade Sentinels was larger than the other 2 areas combined, yet it featured only a dozen or so sprawling pavilions. Each one was attended to by hundreds of servants who maintained the manicured gardens lining shiny stone pathways. The jade that made up all the buildings here was so polished Knox could see her reflection as she passed by as if they were mirrors. "Sure is nicer up here," Helion muttered to Knox's side as he glanced around. "So quiet and peaceful. I thought the jump from an Iron Seeker to a Crimson Tracker was substantial, but this place blows that out of the water. What are the requirements to become a Jade Sentinel nowadays?" Knox asked as they passed through the entrance to the Lotus Informant Hall. "Maybe you could become one before you die." "Not funny. I just need to reach Star Core 6, have 100 completed missions, a recommendation from an existing Jade Sentinel, and pass a combat test." Helion listed off the absurd requirements, and Knox nodded. It was the same as back then. Knox didn't pay much attention to the grand hall with 10-meter-high ceilings supported by jade and gold columns. Her measured steps echoed on the stone floor as she approached the single desk with a lady behind it. "Lotus Informant, I wish to transfer Yingxi." "One moment, please," the woman said, and it was only now that Knox was close enough that she noticed a pendant in the woman's hand and that she was noting something down on the jade slip on the desk. Knox was rather surprised that the Lotus Informant was busy, as they were supposed to do nothing but serve the Jade Sentinels here, and glancing around the room, she only saw one other person than her and Helion in the far corner at a table drinking something. Why does that figure look familiar? Knox wondered. The person was hunched over their drink and obscured by a black cloak like hers. All bounty hunters preferred to move around in secret because someone knowing their location could lead to problems. On that note, Knox put up her hood and directed her glance to the floor while she overheard the Lotus Informant speaking into the pendant. "I'm sorry, but I can't fast-track Diana any higher than the Iron Seekers, even with your recommendation, my lord." "Yes, she would need to come in person to be appointed to the Crimson Trackers." Diana. Knox pondered. The name seemed familiar, but she had met many Dianas over her life. It was a fairly common name. "Excuse me." Knox turned around and faced the Lotus Informant. "Hello, sorry about that." The woman apologized. "I got a sudden call from a sage advisor, so I hope you understand. How can I assist you today?" There's no way that Diana from the Ashfullen Trading Company would know a sage advisor who works directly under the Celestial Warden. "I guess I was worried for nothing." "No worries. How many Yingxi coins do I have?" The woman momentarily looked down and smiled. "You have 7,000 Yingxi coins tied to your account. However, 6,000 is being held as payment for a still uncompleted bounty you took out against Stella Crestfallen. So I have 1,000 left to spend, and without completing any more missions, this is all the wealth I have left. I need enough to buy pills and a defensive artifact or 2, so I must shortchange Helion. Transfer Helion Lightbringer 200 Yingxi coins from my account," Knox instructed. "Only 200. Helion protested, but Knox just glared at him. "As you wish, mistress. The payment will go through by the end of the day." The Lotus Informant glanced up. "Anything else I can help you with?" Knox gestured for Helion to leave with her eyes, and thankfully, the man took the hint. The guard had been rude earlier but was correct. Helion had no right to be in this area for longer than necessary. With the light cultivator gone, Knox turned back to the Lotus Informant. "I need to buy information." "Certainly, what do you wish to know?" Does the pavilion have a lot of information about curses? Specifically, ones that involve a demonic tree? The Lotus informant frowned and stood up. I can check the library at the back for you. Wait one moment, please. I will wait here, Knox said casually as the woman vanished into the back room. With nothing to do, she leaned on the desk and surveyed the room. The person who had been in the corner was gone. Strange, I didn't even feel him leave. A curse. A male voice she recognized even after 500 years tickled her ear. Is that why you haven't reached nascent soul realm in all this time we have been apart? To think the celestial warden was eavesdropping on me. Knox turned and faced the man she had run from all those years ago. But to answer your question, I moved a nasty curse to my forming nascent soul, so until the curse is purged, I am stuck in the star core realm. Mind if I take a look? Can I even say no to a 6th stage nascent soul realm? Knox laughed in her mind but nodded her head in reality. A sudden feeling overwhelmed her as she felt her infant nascent soul squeezed by a chi far above her comprehension. It was as if a godly being was gazing at her very soul. Strange, I have never seen something like this before, he said after a few minutes. There's no need to wait for the Lotus informant to return. I have read everything in that library, and no book or scripture mentions this curse. So what can I do? Knox began to panic. If she was crippled within the star core realm forever, then her lifespan would eventually run out, and she would die. Don't fret. I know of a solution, he said as he touched her shoulder and caressed her neck. Go seek out the Void Mind family, as they are the only ones I know with void affinity. Have one of them purge your nascent soul and then return to me. I can help you rebuild it from scratch within a week. Of course, the Void Mind family, why didn't I think of them? The curse is quarantined to my infant soul, so if I remove all traces of my infant soul and form it again, the curse will be gone. Also, I have worked with them in the past, so getting in contact with them will be a breeze. You would do that for me? Knox asked as she ignored his gestures as best she could. They had been lovers 500 years ago, which wasn't long for a cultivator, but it wasn't nothing. They should have grown distant. I would do anything for you, the celestial warden grinned. It would seem this crazy bastard's love hadn't faltered.